for 5 minutes to go to the start of what is almost invariably the most exciting and the most dramatic Grand Prix of the year, on the track which is certainly the most spectacular and the most demanding for the drivers. As I've said, nearly 2,500 gear changes, speeds which vary from 25 miles an hour around the two hairpins to 170 miles an hour out of the unique tunnel here underneath Lowe's Hotel. It's a circuit where passing is extraordinarily difficult, and so therefore getting into the first corner first is absolutely essential. And only one man is going to be able to do that. We all hope that the rest of them will get round that Saint-Devote corner equally well. And then, although you're going to be seeing it, a quick verbal drive around Monaco. There's the climb from Saint-Devote with the harbour on your right into the famous Casino Square, past the casino and the Hotel de Paris. Then dropping down past the Hotel Metropole into the Mirabeau, one of the two hairpins, to Lowe's Corner. That's a hairpin which they take at only 25 miles an hour. Then after the Portier, through the tunnel, and they burst out into the sunlight at some 160 miles an hour, down to the chicane, where Alberto Ascari went off in, I think, 1955, into the water and was successfully recovered. Then the Tabac, the swimming pool, which is a comparatively new section. Monaco is one of the two most historic Grand Prix circuits in the world. Monza is the other one. There's the Rascasse, which is another very, very slow right-hander. And then after the what is now called the Anthony Nogue corner, but many of you will know as the old Gasworks corner, there is the blast up the so-called start and finish straight, although it's anything but straight, a lap of Monaco, which you'll certainly be seeing, and I'm sure Jonathan will be taking us round and telling us about it from the driver's point of view, where they change gear, where they can pass, and there's very few places where they can do that, how quickly they'll be going. And Damon Hill is there in the Williams, impassively waiting for the start from pole position.
Yes, Damon Hill really drove absolutely superbly in qualifying. He had a few problems on the first day, which takes place on Thursday, uniquely at Monte Carlo, but they got those sorted out. The Williams team really worked well, and Damon put in absolutely stunning laps, and not just one of them, to take the pole. But I'm sure he will realise that he's not going to have it all his own way, certainly not as easily as he had it in qualifying, and that's because his two main adversaries had some problems. And the main one, of course, is Michael Schumacher there. You can see him on the right, second on the grid. Now, Schumacher, in yesterday's quicker day, had problems in the morning. He only managed to get 11 laps in, and that was because they'd had a coming together, or Schumacher had a coming together with Frentzen. He damaged a track rod, and then they found a cracked wishbone on the Benetton. And so, despite having changed those and reset the car up for the qualifying session, Schumacher wasn't quite as confident as normal, and it showed in the times. Although indeed Schumacher just claims at the moment that the Benetton here, unlike Spain, just is not quick enough. Third place, David Coulthard really has done an absolutely superb job. Coming here to the first time, as we heard, he has not only made it to be third on the grid, but he's also not made one mistake on the way round, and that means no running on at any corners. He has not spun, and he has not actually hit anything, and that's an amazing package of things. Then the Ferrari. Well, Gerhard Berger, we saw him a little bit earlier on. Berger has been in absolutely exuberant form in the Ferrari, power sliding it round spectacularly. Perhaps not quite the quickest way, but nevertheless it's certainly been highly entertaining, although of course that kind of driving in the race will really give him tyre problems. But the most frustrated man in qualifying has been Jean Alesi. Alesi in the Ferrari, who's been so much on form this year, was fastest on the first day and the Thursday, but then had the frustration of breaking down with his car, and he was not able to use it, and effectively did not complete a lap until the very late stages of the second qualifying session, when he took over Berger's car, and he was not able to improve. He just got one lap at the very end of the session, and on that one lap Eddie Irvine's damaged Jordan was in the way, or certainly the legacy of that crash, and so there Alesi very, very frustrated. I think that's going to show. We're going to see Alesi really looking to charge hard at the start of the race, and there he is rather on the bottom right of the picture. And now the car's preparing for the final green flag lap. This of course is not the main start, this is the final warm-up lap, the formation lap as it's called. The cars are not allowed to overtake on this. Damon Hill shooting away, and there is the first corner. That is the Saint-Devote corner where Hill and Hakkinen came together to retire both cars in last year's race, coming up the hill here towards Massenet. And this is a very fast section of the track, 160 miles an hour, before they go on the brakes, down to fourth gear, 120 miles an hour, through the left-hander, Massenet, and then dabbing the brakes right through Casino. And that's the right-hand corner here. Tremendous sense of speed coming through this section. The road doesn't look it there, but it is very cambered indeed. Then down the hill, flicking right to avoid a bump, down from 140 miles an hour, second gear, and this is the Lowe's corner. This is the corner where on the first lap you may well see cars absolutely stationary, because we have such a traffic jam problem here at Monte Carlo, and it's very, very important that the drivers don't just get frustrated and don't try and just force their way around the problem. So coming round through the tunnel now, this is halfway around the circuit. The drivers warming up the tyres, warming up the brakes. This time we have once again got the electronic jump start system set up, so that if any car does jump the start, then they will be penalised. And indeed, for those of you who recall the last start in Spain, you're right, the green light didn't in fact come on, but the start was so good from everybody that the race was allowed to continue anyway. And I'm quite sure that won't happen again. All the cars now bunching up. Look at there, Alesi. He really is going to be in challenging form. And it's that third row of the grid, Hakkinen and Alesi, and we've got this wonderful overhead view that's going to see some of the most sparkling action, I think. It's going to be critical for Damon Hill just to make a good, solid, safe start. Schumacher will be trying his utmost to get ahead off the line. Coulthard to keep out of trouble. Berger, I think, will keep out of trouble. Both those two don't want to have anything more than a good, solid, conservative points-gathering top three race. But Alesi and Hakkinen there, 5th and 6th, are going to be, I'm quite sure, the ones to really watch.
Well, for some, the race could end at the first corner. I sincerely hope that it does not. For the others, it will go on for nearly 2 hours. 26 are starting. I will be very surprised if more than 12 finish in this grueling, demanding Monaco Grand Prix of 1995. 161 miles, 78 laps. That is a long, long way. They are exiting the Ras-Cas corner now. And there is the lineup. That is John Alesi, where on his roll bar there is the French Sicilian, and the adrenaline will be flowing through him by the bucketful, because he hardly got out in the qualifying session yesterday. He's only 5th on the grid, having been fastest on Thursday and looking for pole position. But watch the lights this time. Remember, there wasn't a green in Spain. Hopefully there's certainly going to be one here, and it will come on between 4 and 7 seconds after the red. Watch for the green now. There was a jump start from Frentzen in front of me, I think, but Hill has got away well. Is he going to be into Saint-Devot first? And the answer is yes, he is. Schumacher, that's Coulthard spinning. And there is Alesi and Berger. They're both stationary. Coulthard has spun. This is what I feared would happen, and they are certainly going to have... There's a replay as Alesi charges and tucks his left front between the wheels of Coulthard's Williams, which flips up into the air, spins, and then Alesi hits Berger, and the red flag is out. The Monaco Grand Prix is being stopped. Here's a replay. Now look, you see, Alesi has got his wheels in. Up goes Coulthard's Williams. Now Alesi is going to hit Berger as he charges. Now the drivers will be able to come out, and one of the Ferrari drivers will be able to get in the spare car. But if both Ferraris are damaged, the question will be which driver.
Well, it happens time and time again here at Monaco. Off the line, into that first corner. I'm sure that more races... Let's have another look here. Here we're with Alesi. Now look to the left. I think David Coulthard comes across. Whether he's pushed across or not, we don't know. Alesi comes up the inside there. He comes actually, no, he's up the inside there of Coulthard. Coulthard then moves across to close the door. Alesi is on a part of the track where you can see it's already coming back at him. Coulthard goes around. Watch for that is Berger on the left now. Berger's car is, whether it's pushed into Alesi, it's hard to know. But Alesi there, we knew he was going to be charging hard. There he is, that's Coulthard going backwards. There's the Ferrari. Difficult to know quite why Berger cut across into Alesi there, and Berger didn't go around the outside of Alesi. But anyway, the good news for certainly Coulthard is that there is the site, that is the spare Williams car being re-prepared, because the race will now be rerun and it'll be restarted. The cars can refuel. That's Alesi coming back, so the race will be run to the full distance, and Alesi will take over the spare car. That's Coulthard following him back. Here's the first race of the day, back to the pits for Alesi and Coulthard, and no chance for them to exchange words at this stage, clearly. But what we don't know is how badly damaged the other Ferrari is. Now that looks like one Ferrari there, and there's only one spare car. That's Alesi's Ferrari. Look how effective those cranes are. They just pluck the cars out of the way. That's Berger's Ferrari being pulled out of the way, but both cars out, and it's going to be interesting to see who has the spare Ferrari.
Now, I've just remembered that there are 4 Ferraris here. There were spare cars for both Berger and Alesi. You're watching David Coulthard run in. Now, there are 4 Ferraris here, or there were. Now, there is the spare Williams being readied. The other 2 Ferraris will already have been readied with the individual pedal, steering wheel and seat settings for their right drivers. Gerhard Berger walking in with his steering wheel. He has to have a very special steering wheel because Berger is much taller than Alesi, and in order to be able to comply with the rule, that's the Williams of Coulthard and the Ferrari of Gerhard Berger, which have been removed. Here is a replay. Now we're starting with Jean Alesi. Let's see if we can work out who was at fault. He's charging hard, coming upside, alongside, and there's the enlargement on the left of Alesi's left front wheel, going between the wheels of Coulthard's Williams Renault. Now, I'm quite sure that Alesi will say that Coulthard turned in on him. I'm quite sure that Coulthard will say that Alesi wasn't level. There is Berger hitting the Williams, having already been hit by the Ferrari. It's always very, very difficult, Jonathan, to give an opinion which is authoritative and accurate. But if it was anybody's fault, I suspect that it was Jean Alesi's, because he was not sufficiently close or up to the front of Coulthard's car to have claimed the corner. Do you agree?
Well, I'm not sure that I do, Murray, to be honest. I think that Alesi really was quite far alongside David Coulthard. That's David Coulthard explained to Patrick Head what went on. You know, it's very, very difficult to apportion blame in these situations. For a start, we don't see a great deal of what goes on. We see the front shot, but of course further back it's behind the barrier line and a lot of cars there, difficult to know. But my hunch from that, I'm afraid, is that I think for some reason David Coulthard moved across. He squeezed Alesi. Alesi did not swerve into Coulthard, that's for sure. Alesi, I think, had the overlap sufficiently, and I think Coulthard was not aware of just how tight Alesi was against the barrier on the right-hand side. Squeezed into Alesi, and of course putting himself out and relegating. Fortunately, as we've heard, Ferrari do have 2 spare cars, and it looks also that's one of the Tyrrell cars. Let's have another look. I'm sure we're going to see it. And just running back there, you see David Coulthard, I'm afraid, to my mind, he's moved across, he's squeezed into Alesi and forced Alesi into the side of him, and but quite wide Berger. I mean, whether he got a touch just back there from somebody behind him, it didn't look like it. I can't see anything.
Yeah, he was hit by Coulthard. Coulthard's car turned in and hit him, as did Alesi's. But the one thing for sure is, the 2 things for sure, are that poor Damon Hill is suffering because he had got the lead from Michael Schumacher by virtue of his pole position and was into that vital Sandoval corner first. The second thing is, of course, that David Coulthard might not necessarily have the right settings on the spare Williams. There are 3 Williams cars here, there are 2 drivers, and normally the settings are done for the driver who is ahead on the grid, which in the case of the Williams, of course, was Damon Hill. Now that's Mika Häkkinen walking in, or was Mika Häkkinen walking in, as we look at the car being readied for David Coulthard. And from the way the mechanics are working on the pedal settings on the right and in the middle, it looks to me as though it had Damon Hill's settings on it and not David Coulthard's. They're much of a muchness in terms of height, but their driving styles could be different, in which case the fact that Damon Hill's car is set up one way doesn't mean to say that it's going to be right for Coulthard. Now, here is Alesi coming round to join the grid in his spare Ferrari. And just as in Spain there were 4 Ferraris, so in Monaco there are 4 Ferraris, a spare for each of the 2 drivers, an indication of how seriously the Maranello concern take their racing and how much money they're prepared to spend on it. Johnny Herbert on the left talks to Michael Schumacher. There's the jack. I don't know, it's the famous one which Steve Matcham had tucked into the back of Johnny's car in Spain when Johnny drove off with it. But why Michael Schumacher is wheeling it along, I don't know. That's probably the most expensive. It's a front jack which Kenny Handkammer operates. and that's probably the most expensive jack puller in the world, with Schumacher rumoured to get something like $15 million for a year's work.
And that's Ukyo Katayama there. His Tyrrell was damaged in that first corner incident, and Katayama taking the spare Tyrrell coming around to the start. But I'm quite sure that in that incident there, I think David Coulthard, he did not make the best of starts. Jean Alesi did make an excellent start and came up the inside. I think he was legitimately alongside there, and I think Coulthard was possibly distracted by the fact that Berger was on his left-hand side, and that Coulthard then moved right. And there is Coulthard. He's now in the spare car. He's in the Hill car. Although that has Hill on the side, that is just because the spare car is historically allocated to the driver who is highest on the grid. And of course, that was Hill with his pole position. And but again, I still cannot understand why Berger turned in there on Alesi, taking Alesi out.
Well, I see one of the Saubers there, and I also saw one of the Simtex parked inside. Whether it was Jos Verstappen, who's had one of the worst Monacos in the history of the race, I should think, because he'd only done 16 laps out of a possible 70 due to all sorts of problems the team's had. And the team have given us the bad news, incidentally, that they're so strapped for money that unless they can get some more from their sponsors, they will not be at the Canadian Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. And that's the battered David Coulthard's Williams. So they're one of the most experienced racing drivers in the world, Niki Lauda. He's with Tony Jardine.
Nicky, a bit of a disastrous start for Ferrari, but you've got two spare cars.
Yeah, we've got two spare cars, but two spare cars are spare cars and not race cars. So normally you work here for 2 days with your race car, trim and get everything absolutely right, and this is what the car you race. Now both guys have to get into the spare cars, which nobody really knows if the setup is as perfect as the other ones. You can never get the cars right, so for us it's really a disadvantage now.
Did you see the incident on television? What did you make of it?
It's very easy to see that Alesi made a better start than Coulthard. He was catching him on the right, but then David moved over, which is also normal because David can't see Alesi on the right side of him, and then they hit each other, and Coulthard went up in the air. So I think it was, you cannot say it was one guy's fault. I think it was a typical Monte Carlo accident.
Well, we saw Jean go in one spare car. Is Gerhard in the other now?
Yes, because Gerhard hit Jean later. He also went up in the air and damaged his suspension. So both guys are now on spare cars.
Thank you, Nicky.
3 times world champion Niki Lauda, now a consultant to Ferrari, and one of the reasons why the team has improved so much since Alain Prost last won for them in Spain in 1990, except for Gerhard's victory at Hockenheim last year. Only one win since 1990. And Ferrari were looking extremely good here. Well, they still are looking good, but you've heard from Niki Lauda the problems about taking over a spare car when you've been working on your race car through the Thursday free and qualifying sessions. That is Jean Alesi looking grim, as well he might do, knowing that he's got to start in a fairly strange car. Another replay as the cars come towards us. There's Alesi sprinting through on the left, tucking himself right up to the arm car as David Coulthard moves across. Alesi hits Coulthard, Coulthard hits Berger, they contact each other again, and that is a very, very battered Williams Renault now, and a very battered Ferrari as well, as Damon Hill was getting well away up the Beau Rivage, the hill to Casino Square, in front of the man you're looking at now, Michael Schumacher. So Monaco once again lives up to its reputation of being, to put it mildly, a very difficult circuit. That's Rubens Barrichello, the Jordan driver.
Yes, it's easy to understand how these sort of incidents can happen too, when you consider that these cars will be accelerating from 0 to 150 miles an hour off that start and taking about 7 seconds to do it. And you've got 26 cars all accelerating from 0 to 150 miles an hour in more or less 7 seconds, with just centimetres separating them. And the racket from the engines, the dust, the smoke, everything, the whole atmosphere makes it very, very difficult for a driver to be aware of everything that's going on around him. And in this situation, I think that David Coulthard did squeeze across. I don't really think Coulthard was aware of Alesi's presence there. And the important thing for all the drivers now, but particularly David Coulthard, who He's having his first start here at Monaco. For him to put that out of his mind and to just focus and concentrate on the start, as if this start now that's going to be coming up, we're looking for the 5-minute board before the countdown procedure will resume, to make this start as if it was the first one. And of course it was particularly difficult there for, actually, as we look at Gerhard Berger's car being craned off, I did actually wonder whether or not Berger's car might have been damaged in the first incident, and on the first incident that happened when he got hit by Coulthard, and that damaged the suspension on Berger's Ferrari, and that meant when Berger went to turn into the Sandoval corner, the car didn't handle as he thought, and that swerved him into the side of Alesi. And we're obviously going to get lots of pictures here of what went on, and there we are with Alesi again. That's the Coulthard car on the left, and looking now again for Coulthard coming around. You can see up in front we've got Damon Hill, who's made a nice clean start. Schumacher made a good clean start, and that would have been Coulthard spinning at round about 120 miles an hour originally, I would have thought. These cars really are going very quickly in that amount of time, but David is an exceedingly mature driver. He drove so well here in qualifying, and I think he's quite capable of putting this behind him and making sure, or doing what he can to make the second start the one that's going to be clean for everybody. But of course the start is the time when, yes, accidents are most likely into the first corner, but it's also the very best time for a driver to try and overtake and try and get ahead, because once they adopt the largely single file crocodile formation that will certainly establish itself by about halfway round the first lap, maybe at the end of the first lap, getting by anybody thereafter really is very, very difficult. So the first corner is the easiest place to have an accident, but the easiest place, or the least difficult place, to overtake too.
Roland Brunschreider, who is one of the top FIA officials and is responsible for starting the race, getting ready to do so again. Michael Schumacher knows that he's got another chance now to get in the lead by Saint-Devote when the race restarts, which he failed to do the first time. Unsurprisingly, that's a comment and not a criticism, because although he has exactly the same type of V10 Renault engine, and incidentally Renault have never won here at Monaco, as Damon Hill has in his Williams, the fact is that Hill was a full car length ahead of him. That's what pole position is all about. It's a staggered grid in order to increase the safety and reduce the chances of cars driving into each other, which, as you have seen, they still do. And Coulthard has got a lot of psychological pressure now. He knows that his car has been destroyed. There he is, talking to his race engineer, Jock Clear, the man with the headphones on. And Damon Hill's face there reminds me, as he sits in his car, the situation reminds me of the time when Gilles Villeneuve, the great Ferrari driver from Canada, was sitting on the start line in Monza in his Ferrari, waiting for the race to be restarted after a major incident. And it took a long time to get the race going, and Villeneuve just sat there. He didn't want to destroy his concentration, and that's what Damon Hill will be doing. Luca Badoer waiting to get into his Minardi. We know that Mika Salo, the Finnish driver, is going to be starting from the pit lane in his Tyrrell Yamaha, having experienced problems at that start. I'm sure that there are other drivers who also had major problems. We've seen one of the Saubers, we've seen one of the Simtex. Sadly, I can't tell you which ones at the present moment. But with that sort of pinched up look on his face due to the close-fitting helmet, Gerhard Berger sits there in the Ferrari. 5 minutes to go. Berger is fourth on the grid.
And we can see on Berger's visor there, well, we could see on Berger's visor, the edges, the turned up edges of the rip-offs, because the dirt and oil and muck that accumulates on the visors as the drivers race really is quite phenomenal. And of course the drivers, we should see it again here, the drivers have these thin films of plastic that lie over the front of the main visor. They're called rip-offs. There we can see it there on Alesi's car, or Alesi's helmet, and the drivers will pull these rip-offs off one by one. They've normally got two on the helmet. Normally by about 20 laps the first one will be peeled off, and we see that occasionally. You see their hand come across the front of the helmet as they're racing, and then perhaps another 20 or so laps the second one comes off. But the important thing there is not to end up taking them all off too quickly, to leave you with some 2/3 race distance just to do on one screen of remaining visor. But a concern that Damon Hill's going to have, and that Schumacher's going to have, is that their two cars, unlike Alesi's car there, will have already completed one start on the clutches. And when you consider that these cars have a first gear which will take them all the way to 85 miles an hour, the clutch is dropped, the clutch is let go instantly, and it's wheel spin that helps them, and the starts are very, very hard indeed on clutches, and that can make doing the second start not quite so easy as the first.
Those were the eyes of Mika Häkkinen, 6th on the grid. I can tell you that in some miraculous way there are 2 Saubers on the grid. One of them is occupied for the first time by French driver Jean-Christophe Bouillon, who is the Williams test driver, but is taking the place of Karl Wendlinger in the Sauber team, we think, for the rest of the season. The unfortunate Wendlinger, who crashed here in practice at Monaco last year and came back at the beginning of this season after being out for all the rest of last year, really hasn't got his pace back.
And look at Damon Hill's helmet there. There's a lump of rubber on the bottom opening of his visor there. Now that he will have put there just to keep the visor ajar by a tiny amount. Damon, like all the drivers, needs a little bit of airflow around to keep some ventilation around his face. But he also wants to stop the visor misting up. The humidity here is relatively high, although the temperature is high. And these little details make a big difference to a driver. The rip-offs, the helmet fit, the visor being just kept ajar, and you can see Damon has put some black tape on the side of the rip-offs to help him locate it, because when you're doing 130-40 miles an hour with one hand up in the airstream trying to pick off just one of those rip-offs, it really is very difficult.
We've lost 21 minutes already. That doesn't mean to say the race is going to be any shorter. It's 21 minutes since it started, and we saw that collision between Alesi, Berger and Coulthard, which immediately put those 3 cars out of the race, because less than the necessary number of laps for a race to be declared official had been completed. It means that this race is still going to be over 78 laps, and it seems to me that the Williams mechanics, who are finalising the adjustments on David Coulthard's car, which was intended originally for Damon Hill as Damon's spare car, those adjustments have been successfully completed. They're not going to be nearly as major adjustments as they would have been if, for instance, Alesi had to start in a spare car that had been intended for Berger, because Berger is a big, tall, lanky chap. Alesi is much shorter. And look at that's Mika Häkkinen's car. Look at the steering wheel. When the car was made bigger for Nigel Mansell, Mika Häkkinen said, oh, that's good, I'll be able to have a bigger steering wheel. He had a 28 centimetre steering wheel. He's had a special one made up 30 centimetres wide, because his style is very different to that of Nigel Mansell. Nigel likes a small wheel and a lot of muscle power to heave the car around the corners. Mika likes to use more leverage, which gives him as a result of which he has a bigger wheel. So now we are getting ready for this restart. Damon Hill there in pole position in the Williams. Michael Schumacher second. Roland Brunscheider all ready to give the green flag, which will send them off on another formation lap and then another start. There's no reason why the second start should be any more successful, said he gloomily, than the first one. But looking on the bright side, I sincerely hope that it is, because cars are getting short. Only Ferrari have got 4 of them and are able to give each of their drivers a spare car. Some of the spare cars in the other teams are already being used, and they're off on the second formation lap.
Well, here they go again, and this is where the incident took place, that Sandovo corner. About 60-70 miles an hour as they go round there in second gear, and let's just hope that this time they do get away cleanly. Up the hill, now driving up here, you can see it really does weave around quite a bit, and approaching that up through the gears at 150, 160, nearly 170 is an amazing experience. It's just like threading a needle. It's very difficult to even judge where the barriers are like that. But we obviously have to hope that this start does get away cleanly. I can remember a race that I took part in, the Austrian Grand Prix back in 1987, when in fact we had no less than 3 starts before finally the race managed to get underway. And again, it's so desperately difficult for the drivers to be sitting there and knowing that they can all do something about making sure it's clean. They can all be that little bit more cautious, but the margin between being a little bit more cautious and yet being that cautious that you lose places really is very tiny indeed. So, through the tunnel, and this corner through the tunnel is particularly difficult because it's blind. You can't see, like we can't see now, you can't see where the exit is. And David Coulthard on the first day of practice wasn't flat out through there. He didn't keep his foot flat to the floor, and no great surprise, because and that looks like...
it's Jos Verstappen, Simtek, the unfortunate Dutchman who's had a really character-building Monaco time so far. Looks as though he's not starting the race.
Yes, it's been a miserable weekend for Verstappen so far. He's had problems throughout the whole weekend, and he's a very talented driver, the driver that took over at Benetton last year, and great shame for him to not be able to really reveal his potential, which he could well have done here. And this circuit is the best test of driver talent anywhere in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Let's hope that we're not seeing the last of the very worthy Simtek team here at Monaco, and that they're able to raise the money that they worthily need to get to Canada for the next race. But for this one, we ride with Mika Häkkinen coming up to 6th position on the grid as Damon Hill, for the second time on the left, comes up into the pole position slot with, on the right, Michael Schumacher. Behind Damon Hill is his teammate David Coulthard, and then behind him the two Ferraris of Gerhard Berger, 4th on the grid, and Jorna Lacey 6th. There is Mika Häkkinen, where on his roll bar, or were, in 6th position. Behind him is Johnny Herbert, 7th on the grid. 8th is Martin Brundle, 9th is Eddie Irvine, and in 10th, Mark Blundell. You can see him in the back of your picture on the right-hand side behind Schumacher, the red and white car. The green flag means ready to go for the second time. Red, green, go. Again, Damon Hill, and Coulthard is having a go again, trying to get through to Sander Vaught in front of Michael Schumacher. He fails, but he's round this time, ahead of both the Ferraris. So Coulthard has kept his 3rd position. Hill leads, Schumacher 2nd, Coulthard is in 3rd position, into Casino Square at the highest point of the course. Now they drop down, and it's a Lacey 4th, Berger 5th, Johnny Herbert is up into 6th position. This is the right-hander at Mirabeau, now down to the slow Lowe's hairpin, the most famous television motor racing shot of all. Hill leads, Schumacher 2nd. They're pulling away a little bit already from David Coulthard, followed by the two Ferraris, out of the Portier, into the tunnel where they build up to 160 miles an hour, believe it or not, from light to dark, almost to the light again, as they come out of the tunnel into the chicane, and that's down to about 40 miles an hour, and the Ferraris are closing right up behind Coulthard. Hill, Schumacher, Coulthard, Lacey, Berger, Herbert, Häkkinen, Irvine, Brundell, Barrichello, and the rest of them go through round the swimming pool. And Damon Hill has got the advantage now because he has got a clear track in front of him. He knows this track, he knows this is his chance, and he knows that behind him he's got Michael Schumacher, so he cannot relax for 1 split second. End of lap 1, Hill leads by half a second. Coulthard is in 3rd position, and he's already 2 seconds behind Damon Hill. We're getting the repetition again, as we have had so many times in the past, of the two rivals for the World Championship of 1994, Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher, who were separated by only 1 point at the end of a season, fighting for supremacy again. Now we're looking back from Hill's car. Down to Lowe's. Schumacher, there he is. Look back and you see Coulthard coming out of Lowe's. And what Schumacher will be trying to do, of course, is to pressure Damon Hill into making a mistake.
Yes, and he really is going hard at that. Now, when we bear in mind that in qualifying that Damon Hill was quicker than Michael Schumacher, that was fairly clear yesterday afternoon. The situation we're looking at is a far cry from last year when Schumacher on the first lap pulled out nearly 4 seconds. Schumacher really disappeared last year, and that situation is very much not being reversed in that Damon Hill is not able to pull out any significant gap from Schumacher. And one of the things that we have to wonder at this point is, does this mean that their fuel loads are different? And one scenario that might fit is the fact that Hill could be having a half a tank of fuel, or could have half a tank of fuel in that Williams, and meaning to do just 1 stop. Schumacher could be having a third of a tank, needing to be doing 2 stops. That would make Schumacher about 1 second of that quicker because of his lighter weight than Hill, and that could mean that Schumacher, to get the benefit of that advantage, would need to find a way past Hill very soon.
Well, what I can tell you, which I couldn't tell you before the race had started, was that the Williams team were experimenting with a very heavy fuel load in the half-hour warm-up this morning to see whether they could make just 1 fuel stop. I know that, but what I don't know is what the decision was. Unsurprisingly, they wouldn't tell me. But it could well be that Hill is going to make just one stop. What we don't know then, of course, is how many Schumacher's going to make. There he is in second place. We are now on lap 3 already of the Monaco Grand Prix. Hill, Schumacher, Coulthard. Those two are clear as they go into the tunnel. Look back and you'll see Coulthard come through with a Lacey tucked up behind him. Berger is in 5th position. Johnny Herbert is still 6th. Hakkinen is 7th. Eddie Irvine is in 8th position. Martin Brundle is 9th and Rubens Barrichello is 10th. A tremendous scrap at the front.
Indeed. Now at this point, let's assume that Hill does have a heavier car. He is making one stop. Schumacher's going to make 2 stops. Now that could give Schumacher this 1 second performance advantage if Schumacher could get ahead. But if Damon Hill keeps driving around on the line, keeping it neat, he needs to do nothing untoward at all. But so difficult is it to overtake here that he should well be able to keep his lead in the situation. And that could all be part of the strategy. But just a word on a couple of drivers who really did make particularly good starts. Lacey moved up from 5th to 4th, and Johnny Herbert too, up from 7th on the grid to 6th on the grid. A good start there for Johnny Herbert, and Herbert really has been much more confident, having got that 2nd place in the last Grand Prix at Spain. He qualified well, he was within a second of Michael Schumacher. We're seeing a different, more confident, faster Johnny Herbert now.
Well, we know that the controllers of the race are going to be taking a pretty dusty view if anybody cuts across the chicane, which 1 or 2 people did in the Formula 3 race yesterday. I suspect they're very unlikely to do that as the ultimate professionals in Formula 1. And into the tunnel for the 4th time go the leaders. Hill, Williams, Schumacher, Benetton. This is turning out to be a classic fight already. Let's hope it stays that way, because to keep up this pressure for the whole race of 78 laps is going to take a lot of doing. And look how close Michael Schumacher is. Remember that he is partially blinded as he goes into corners, unlike Damon Hill, because he's got the big wing of the Williams Renault in front of him. We look back from Hill as he goes into the Rascasse, round the brown-roofed cafe, out of Antonino. And Schumacher looks to me as though he's going to have a go to try and get past at this right-hander which is coming up. No, he's too far back at Saint-Devant.
And one of the things that we can see wonderfully here, looking at these 2 cars going around virtually tied together, is the fact that the appearance is that Damon Hill is braking a little bit earlier than Michael Schumacher, because Schumacher appears to close up under braking, and yet it looks as if perhaps Hill has got more power because he manages to pull away under acceleration. Now that is not the case. That is just simply the impression, and that is because, of course, Hill is arriving at the corner before Schumacher. He gets on the brakes earlier, and conversely, Hill is able to get on the power earlier coming out. But we do get this on a tight circuit like this very apparent closing and then expanding of the gap, as the physical spacing of the cars around these tight corners makes a very real difference to when they have to brake and when they accelerate.
Just imagine what it's like in the car. They're coming down now at 165 to 170 miles an hour, braking for the chicane, down to 30 miles an hour on the apex there. They've got 700 horsepower blasting away behind them, putting the power down through those wide tyres. But now, this year's cars, which have got a 60mm ride height, including the 10mm wooden plank which is underneath, are much more nervous than last year's cars. And all around them, they've got steel barriers and walls. You have to drive well within your limits at Monaco, because if you make a wrong move, it's going to be into the barrier. And we've seen already today with Lacey, Berger and Coulthard what happens if you do that.
So Hill and Schumacher cross the line to complete lap 5, and as they do so, David Coulthard now has dropped 5 seconds on Damon Hill, 1 second per lap. Now, if this was at any other circuit, we presume perhaps that Hill was running the car lighter. Maybe one scenario could be that Hill was running the car to do 2 stops and Coulthard 1 stop. But this is David Coulthard's first time at Monaco. We shouldn't forget he's in the spare car, and in the qualifying he was 1.2 seconds slower than Damon. So it's my suspicion that they are in fact probably on the both fuel strategy, and we're just simply seeing the consequences of David's unfamiliarity with the car and with the circuit. And meanwhile behind him he's got Jean Lacey all over the back of him. He's got a traffic jam. We've got a Lacey, we've got Berger, we've got Herbert, and we've got Hakkinen. And there's little that those drivers are going to be able to do about getting by each other unless somebody makes a mistake. And the real trick here is just to try and keep the pressure up, to try and get as close as one can can wwithout getting so close that you get right up underneath and lose your downforce, but close enough to make somebody in front make a mistake, maybe brake too late, run wide to give you the chance to nip up the inside or get a better run on the way out of the corner and then accelerate by on the exit. But nothing is easy.
Lap 6, there they are. Remember, this is only David Coulthard's 13th Grand Prix. He hasn't even got a full year of 16 Grand Prix races behind him. He's in 3rd place, now nearly 6 seconds behind the leaders, but in front of Alesi's Ferrari, in front of Gerhard Berger's Ferrari. There is Berger. Behind him in 6th position is Johnny Herbert. 7th is Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren Mercedes. 8th is Eddie Irvine in the Jordan. There's Häkkinen in the red and white car coming up the Beau Rivage towards us. That's him round into Casino Square, round the Hotel de Paris. Alesi, Berger now dropping down past the Hotel Metropole, hard on the brakes for the Mirabeau. That's Johnny Herbert. Mika Häkkinen in the McLaren, which is now much, much better than it was. It's less than a second in terms of lap time on the grid behind the pole position man. The McLaren technicians are getting it right.
And if you wonder what that blob is on top of the rollover bar on Häkkinen's car, that is the camera. We've got these overhead cameras mounted right on top of the cars on Eddie Irvine's Jordan, on Häkkinen's McLaren and on Alesi's Ferrari. And whilst you may have thought that the drivers may not be too keen about having that kind of appendage on the car, it may interfere with the aerodynamic performance, that's Berger's. He doesn't have the camera. Herbert doesn't, but there we are, that's Häkkinen with it. It really seems to make very little difference, and we're delighted because that means we get some of these superb pictures.
Nowhere but nowhere is the pressure on a driver as great as it is at Monaco. We're coming up already towards 1/10 race distance, which will be lap 8, because they're coming through to complete lap 7. Johnny Herbert with Mika Häkkinen there behind him. Häkkinen is 7th, Johnny Herbert is 6th. Up to Sander Vott again go the Ferraris. And it's quite clear that the Ferrari pace cannot match that of the Williams-Renault of Damon Hill or Michael Schumacher. But what we don't know is what their respective fuel loads are. Ferrari always carry a lot more fuel than the other cars because of their hungry, thirsty V12 engine. But at the present moment, Damon Hill is the fastest driver on the track, 1 minute 25.2, and Alesi is lapping 1 second slower.
And I can tell you that Gianni Morbidelli has just come into the pits in the Arrows car. That seems much too early for a routine pit stop, so I suspect some kind of problem for Morbidelli. Great shame there. He really is a very impressive driver, qualifying here in a tremendously 7th last year, 13th this year. But I don't think we can say, Murray, that the Ferraris are off the pace of Damon Hill's Williams, because both Ferraris are being held up at the moment by David Coulthard in the Williams. Alesi is just 7/10 of a second behind Coulthard, and although that can look quite a lot on the track, the fact is that one just cannot get any closer because the physical spacing is really limited by how close you can be around the slowest corners, and those are Lowe's and the one we've just seen, that's Raskas. And the mere length of a car, if you take, if we look at Alesi or Berger behind Coulthard at somewhere like Lowe's corner, it's about another 15 seconds away, you'll see that they are absolutely together, and that is a certain time gap, and that gap between those cars at that speed is 7/10 of a second, and of course 7/10 of a second at 160 miles an hour is much bigger.
Now Damon Hill is pulling away, no doubt about it. 1.6 seconds is his lead over Michael Schumacher, as off goes the McLaren at Sander Vott of Mika Häkkinen. It's obviously a difficult corner for the McLaren drivers because Mark Blundell went off but earlier in the practice, but it looks to me as though Mika Häkkinen was out of the race. His body language said to me as he spoke to the marshal that Mika Häkkinen had retired. I don't know, we'll wait and see, in which case I think he's the first retirement, although 2 cars failed to start. Yes, it is. Mika Häkkinen is out on lap 9 out of 78.
Yes, some kind of mechanical problem there for the McLaren, I'm sure. A great shame, because the McLarens have tended to be better in race form than they have in qualifying, and this could have been a very good race for them. Häkkinen was a superb 2nd on the grid last year, didn't get the chance to race after he collided with Damon Hill off the line.
Top 12, lap 9, Damon Hill leads Michael Schumacher by 1.6 seconds. Coulthard, Alesi and Berger are close together. There is the Scotsman and the Frenchman Alesi, followed by the Austrian Gerhard Berger, who is 5th. Johnny Herbert is 6th. Mika Häkkinen is out, so up comes to 7th place Eddie Irvine. 8th is Martin Brundle, 9th is Rubens Barrichello, 10th is Mark Blundell in the sole McLaren Mercedes. 11th is Olivier Panis, and in 12th position is Heinz-Harald Frentzen in a Sauber which has been built up overnight. And Alesi is maintaining the pressure, but David Coulthard is resisting it brilliantly. The find of this year, certainly, David Coulthard, the ex-Williams test driver, ex-Formula 3000 driver. He was second in the European Championship. Ex-Formula 3 driver, the man who won the prestige races at Macau and the Masters. And before that, of course, Formula Ford and karts, like all of them.
So the big question now is pit stops. How many are they going to make? When are they going to happen? And looking at the pace that Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher are running, I think I'm going to come down on the side of the fence that says 2 stops, and that means the first stop round about lap 25. We're lap 9 now, so that's it's another 16 laps onwards. And that's one of the 40 cars. That's Moreno having gone off there. Mechanical problem or incident, difficult to say. There's Coulthard, there's Alesi. I think we've probably seen most of these people doing 2 stops. Now, if anybody's on 1 stop and those ahead are if anyone's on 2 stops and those ahead are on 1, that's going to be a problem, because no one looks like getting by anybody else at the moment. And if you intend to make 2 stops and you're being held up by somebody going slowly making 1, then you're going to lose all of the potential advantage that you could get from running the car light in these early stages.
And of course, when you've made a fuel stop, when you come out, you're in amongst the traffic, and you can see how difficult it is to get past at Monaco. And also remember the problems that some of the teams, notably Williams, have had here at Monaco with pit stops. Remember when Nigel Mansell, leading Ayrton Senna, came into the pits thinking he had a puncture, when in fact all he had was a loose wheel nut, rejoined the race and had the most exciting finish to a Monaco Grand Prix I have ever seen. Remember when Alain Prost in a Williams Renault was stuck in the pit lane through his inability to get the car away cleanly because of problems he was having with the clutch. So it's far more, or can be, than just the time it takes to actually physically change the tyres and wheels and top up with fuel. Coulthard is third there. Behind him Alesi, behind him Gerhard Berger, Williams, Ferrari. Ahead of both of them, Michael Schumacher, who is now 1.8 seconds behind Damon Hill, who's increasing the gap. The fastest man on the track, still the fastest lap, 1:25.248, is held by Damon Hill. Looking good in the Williams Renault. Alesi. I have never seen such dejection in a racing driver as there was with Jean Alesi yesterday when he was coming round the Rascasse in his Ferrari, only for the hydraulic pressure to fade. He stalled the engine. He was pushed by the marshals. He started the engine on the clutch, as a result of which he was obliged to take over Gerhard Berger's car. That adversely affected Berger's qualifying performance, and it certainly adversely affected Alesi's. And he went from fastest on Thursday afternoon to 5th fastest. He seems to be fated to start 5th on the grid. He started there in Brazil, he started there in Argentina, and already they are lapping. That's Pedro Diniz in the second of the 40 cars, bumbling his way around the circuit, if I may be so unkind. But it is true, the 40 cars are some 8 seconds off the pace here, as they have been at every other Grand Prix. Gerhard Berger's got past, Alesi's got past, Coulthard's got past, and you can see how close it is for third as you look down at the Rascasse.
Well, Berger's got past, but he didn't get past at that chicane where Coulthard and Alesi did. And just look how much time that's lost Berger. He can be lapping for one lap after lap, trying to make up tenths, and he can lose 2 seconds just like that, when someone like Diniz didn't see the third car, moved across, and then left Berger to lose so much time.
Back again with the leaders. That was Damon Hill. That is Michael Schumacher down to the Mirabeau. This is one of the few places where you can pass if you're brave enough. I remember Martin Brundle was last year when in the McLaren he drove round the outside of Gerhard Berger's Ferrari, subsequently to finish a superb second in the McLaren Peugeot, as it was then. Into the tunnel again then. This is lap 13. Hill leads. There is Schumacher. 10 seconds behind them now, David Coulthard, with Alesi virtually underneath his rear wing, 2 seconds ahead of 5th place Gerhard Berger, who is 5 seconds ahead of 6th position Johnny Herbert. So both the Benettons are in the top 6, both the Williams cars are in the top 6, both the Ferraris are in the top 6. There's a long way to go in this race yet. We're only on lap 13 out of 78, and a lot could and will happen. Out of the Rascas. Now there is Damon. Well, Damon won in Argentina, of course. He won the San Marino Grand Prix. He was leading in Brazil, leading Michael Schumacher until his rear suspension collapsed and took what seemed to be a certain victory away from him. And as a result of his problem in Spain, which resulted in him only finishing in 4th place, he's 1 point behind Michael Schumacher in the World Championship. Now we are riding with Schumacher now.
Now we've just heard that Olivier Panis, there it is, jump start penalty, 10 seconds, and that means we're going to see Panis in the Ligier come back into the pit to be held stationary. That is surely it. That is Panis coming in. He will be held. I beg your pardon, we think that's Brundle leaving the pits. And now Hill is feeling much more comfortable for sure. He's pulled out 2 seconds over Michael Schumacher, and that's a massive amount of pressure away there from Hill. And it would appear that Hill has been consistent. He's maintained that consistency, and Schumacher, having had made the early charge that we know he's so capable of, and that's Frentzen in the Sauber with a penalty for Sauber. That's his 10-second penalty gone, and out he goes.
Yes, and Damon Hill is now in a strong position because 2 seconds lead here is going to take a lot of chipping away. Could be very easily lost. We're with Hill at the present moment, going round the right-hander at Anthony Node, up to the right-hander at Saint-Devote, which caused the problem at the beginning of the race. There is Michael Schumacher. You can see the gap, and I can tell you that Damon Hill has got this race by the throat at the present moment because he's increased his lead in 1 lap from 1.9 seconds to 2.4 seconds, and the gap between Schumacher and Coulthard is just under 10 seconds. Now, I was about to say that Michael Schumacher stoutly denies, and Martin Brundle has been given a 10-second jump start for a 10-second penalty for jumping the start, and that would have been him that we saw taking it.
Yes, this really is very interesting indeed, and that's one of the Georges coming into the pit. It's Barrichello coming into the pit for his stop. This is very interesting because it's highly unusual to have this number of jump start penalties. It's a penalty again for Barrichello, and this really is highly unusual. And it's my hunch that what's happened here is that the electronic devices, which are only being used for the second time, are being rather too eager. I cannot believe that all these drivers have actually jumped the start by that extent. Now, we saw a similar situation at the San Marino Grand Prix when the pit lane speed limit was exceeded by a number of cars, including David Coulthard. In fact, what happened then was that was the first race when the speed guns that had been used were replaced with speed traps all the way down the pit lane. So we've seen increasing electronics being used for both pit lane speeds and now the start procedure, and it looks like I think probably from the pit lane side that was probably reasonable in that the guns were not that accurate, but it's very difficult to believe that all of these drivers actually jumped the start.
Well, I know Heinz-Harald Frentzen did on both occasions because he was right in front of me, and he was away as soon as the red went off, before the green came on. And you can see now Damon Hill is surging past. He's just taken Bertrand Gachot in the Pacific, and Gachot is in 18th position. And of course that's helping Damon Hill. He's got past Gachot. Michael Schumacher has not. The gap is 2.2 seconds. But this jump start business, and Mika Hakkinen, this jump start business is here, I think, a case of the organisers and the top people in motorsport, the FIA, in effect showing the red card to the drivers, saying we now have the means to check whether or not you're jumping a start other than subjective means, and you better not do it in future because you know what's going to be happening. That's Michael Schumacher. The gap was 2.18 seconds. Has the fact that Hill got past Gachot and Barrichello and Schumacher did not helped Damon Hill.
Now again, with regard to these jump starts, I know that the FIA have been experimenting to establish the correct gap, the correct amount of tolerance, because of course every measurement has a tolerance. In the first 4 Grand Prix of the year, that was Brazil, Argentina and San Marino and Spain, were actually used setting up, trying to establish just how much tolerance to give the drivers. Now, for the last Grand Prix in Spain, I think they thought they had worked that out, and that the results they got from Spain, when nobody jumped the start, as I recall, concurred with the officials, with the judges of fact who are cited down the grid. But having presumably thought they got the gap right, either people have been making very wild starts from midway down the back of the midway down the grid, and that's where these are generally taking place, or the gap maybe is not consistent or shouldn't be consistent from track to track. I'm sure there's going to be a story to tell there at the end of this race.
Parnis has had a penalty, so's Frentzen, so's Brundle, so's Barrichello, so's Morbidelli, and so has Montemini, the Italian in the Pacific. We're on lap 17 in this 78-lap race as Damon Hill, we're with him, passes Montemini. There is Schumacher, lap 17. The gap is up to 2.4 seconds. Damon Hill is inching away from the Benetton Renault, and Michael Schumacher is not coping with the traffic as well as the Englishman ahead of him is. David Coulthard is still third, so it's Williams building up the Constructors' Championship points. 10 for Damon Hill if he continues where he is. 4 for David Coulthard. Here's a replay. Coming towards us is Coulthard as Lacey goes through, and Coulthard slows right down. You saw that. We're back again with Damon Hill, who is leading, going round Casino Square. Lacey is up to third, Berger's up to fourth, Coulthard is in the pits, and is the unfortunate Scotsman David Coulthard again retires. He's had a lot of retirements in his short career. He failed to finish in Argentina, he failed to finish in Spain, and David Coulthard is out. And he's only got second gear, is the message that we've just received. He retires on lap 18 out of 78. Still another 60 to go. And those potential 14 World Championship points for the Williams-Renault team have now come down to a potential 10 for Damon Hill. Schumacher still second. Up to third goes Alesi. Up to fourth goes Berger. And Alesi is 12 seconds behind Hill. Herbert in the second Benetton is now fifth. Eddie Irvine is again in the points in a brand new Jordan, and this is Morbidelli taking his 10-second penalty. Out he goes, and back again with Damon Hill completing lap 18 out of 78, 60 to go. Now, where is Schumacher? You can see visually that the gap is increasing, and it's now 2.4 seconds. Damon Hill needs reliability. But we must not forget that these tyre and fuel stops have got to be made, and they can change the race completely.
Yes, indeed, but what a great shame there for David Coulthard. That second start that he made really was superb, and in fact, if he'd had more room, he might have moved up from his third place on the grid, but he sensibly held back, and he adopted that third position, really driving well, no mistakes there. And it looks as if Williams do have a bit of a weakness with their gearbox, because it was the gearbox problem that put Coulthard out again in Spain. And whilst I know they were having more components made to improve the situation, there was a bearing failure for Coulthard in Spain. It could just be that those components weren't on the spare car, and that's the Corsa car that Coulthard was in. But having said all that, I think it's unlikely, because Williams is certainly a team capable with enough resources to apply any improvement across the board.
The fire is certainly burning inside Damon Hill. Did you see the way he summarily dismissed Mika Salo in the Tyrrell as he lapped him? Salo, in his first Monaco Grand Prix, is in 16th place in the Tyrrell Yamaha. And Damon Hill now is, I suspect, no, Schumacher's got past Salo as well. And Damon Hill is coming up to Morbidelli, who we've just seen take his 10-second penalty on lap 20 out of 78. And Schumacher has got the lead down to 1.8 seconds, presumably because he was able to get past Salo more cleanly than Damon Hill, in which case he must have done it very well indeed, because I thought Damon was terrific. That is Montemini taking his penalty as Damon Hill goes inside Morbidelli Out goes Montermini from the pit lane. Morbidelli. Now, is Schumacher... Yes, Schumacher has been able to get past Damon Hill. We're on the wing of Schumacher's Benetton now, into the tunnel. Chasing Damon Hill. Out of the tunnel. Look for the light change.
And here is a potential overtaking spot, but that braking zone from 180 miles or 170 miles an hour down to just, and that's Bouillon there, that's in front of Damon Hill. This is the French Formula 3000 champion, the former Williams test driver, now taken over from Carl Wendlinger. And this is going to be the kind of opportunity, as ever, Hill gets by Bouillon. That's good for Hill. Schumacher will maybe able to get by, yes, well done Bouillon there. He's really looked at his mirrors in his first Grand Prix here. He's done well, not interfering with the lead battle.
It's danger time for Damon Hill. The lead has come down, and the last lap of Michael Schumacher was half a second quicker than Damon Hill. This is a replay of Hill going through on the swimming pool section, and the gap is 1.2 seconds on lap 21 out of 78. Still, we have to have the leaders come in to have their fuel and tyre stops, and it's certainly my guess that the Williams people, and for that matter the Benetton people, Schumacher, who is second, Herbert, who is fifth, are only going to be making one stop. I stand to be corrected. We'll soon see. Down to lows again, and you don't need me to give you a time gap. You can see that Schumacher is closing up on Damon Hill.
What's going to be particularly significant now is that Alesi has not got David Coulthard's car ahead of him, and on the last lap Alesi has set his fastest race lap, and he's closed. He in fact lapped 1.5 seconds faster than Michael Schumacher. We know that Schumacher was slightly held up there by the back marker as he was coming through, but this could provide the chance just to monitor Alesi. He's 8.9 seconds behind now.
Lap 21, you're watching the battle between race leader Damon Hill and second place Michael Schumacher as Martin Brundle comes into the pits for his tyre change. Alesi is third, Berger is fourth, 10 seconds behind the leaders. Johnny Herbert is in fifth position, and out goes Martin Brundle. In sixth place is Eddie Irvine. Seventh is Mark Blundell in the McLaren, the only McLaren. Luca Badoer is higher than he's ever been in a Grand Prix this year in the Minardi. He is in eighth position. Ukyo Katayama in the Tyrrell Yamaha is ninth. Pierluigi Martini in the second Minardi Ford is in 10th position. Martin Brundle has dropped to 14th place, one lap down as a result of his tyre stop. And Damon Hill turns into the Mirabeau, drops down to Lowe's corner. The blue and white Williams, the multicoloured Benetton, the two top men of Grand Prix racing of 1995 and 1994, battling for World Championship points and victory at Monaco.
Now, it's my guess, in fact, that all of the first four drivers, Hill, Schumacher, Alesi and Berger, are going to make two stops. Now, if that's going to be right, they're going to be coming into the pits for their first one within the next 4 or 5 laps. Lap 21, lap 25 will be a normal kind of time to run. Now, a driver who is some way behind is Johnny Herbert. Herbert back there in 5th place. He's 17 seconds behind Gerhard Berger. And that's quite a big gap, and it may well be that Herbert is, in fact, running slower, partly because he's running heavier, and running heavier would mean just making one stop, and that could put Herbert in quite an interesting situation as this race develops.
Lap 22, Damon Hill exits the last right-hander as he comes through to complete the lap. He was leading by 1.6 seconds. He goes up to Saint-Devot as Schumacher completes the lap, and the gap has increased to 2.1 seconds as a result of Damon Hill doing that last lap just half a second faster than the Benetton Renault. And it's quite amazing when you think that although these two cars in front have the same type of Renault V10 engine, everything else is different. Different technicians, different factories, a lot of the components may be the same, but the thinkers, the designers, the developers behind each of those two cars are totally different, and it's an indication of how razor sharp the competition in Formula One is, that they are so closely matched. The Ferraris may be dropping back because of a fuel strategy situation. I don't think that's the case. That's one of the Saubers. It's Jean-Christophe Bouillon. There he is, number 30 going through. He's in 15th position. He's already been lapped once by Damon Hill, and he's about to be lapped again. And this is going to give Schumacher the opportunity to close up, because Bouillon has got in front of him Martin Brundle, who's got in front of him Heinz-Harald Frentzen.
I think that's actually Frentzen there ahead of Damon Hill there. Frentzen really has had a miserable time getting shown there the blue flag, and into the pits comes, that looks like Rubens Barrichello for his first stop.
Yes, but much more important is the fact that now Schumacher, by virtue of the traffic situation, is right on the tail of Damon Hill. I wish we were looking at them. It's interesting to look at Barrichello, but it would be a lot more interesting if we could watch the race at the front. How close is Schumacher? Here is the answer. We're on Schumacher's car now, and that is Damon Hill's Williams Renault plunging down to the Mirabeau. Past Pedro Diniz's 40, as does Schumacher. And this is where Gerhard Berger and Damon Hill had contact in a previous Monaco Grand Prix. There is Michael Schumacher. That's the first time we've seen this. And in cockpit camera, and the German is in the same situation now as his brother Ralph was in the Formula 3 race yesterday, right on the tail of the leader. Into the pits comes Mark Blundell from 7th position in the McLaren Mercedes. He's already scored a point for the team this year by finishing 6th in his first race for McLaren in Brazil. Nice stop, 7.5 seconds. Look at the people in the pit lane now with Damon Hill. There's Schumacher. That's how close it is. And why Montemini has been given the black flag, I don't know at the present. It's because he failed to stop after 3 laps for his penalty, and Hill is in. Hill is in. This is the first fuel and tyre stop for a race front man. Damon Hill, 8.5 seconds, and that was on lap 25. And as a result of that, of course, Schumacher goes into the lead, followed by Alesi. 3rd is Berger, where with Schumacher, Damon Hill has dropped down to 4th place and probably, 4th position. Johnny Herbert is still 5th. And now the race is going to turn on when Schumacher comes in, how long it takes the Benetton mechanics to change his tyres and wheels and refuel him, and whether Damon Hill can regain the lead whilst they're doing so.
Now let's not forget that in the last Grand Prix in Spain, Schumacher kept going a lot longer than Damon Hill and in fact made 1 pit stop less. But I don't think that's the case here. I'm sure Schumacher will be in the next couple of laps or so. Look at the way he's driving. He's really attacking now. He's got clear space ahead of him. And I believe Schumacher knows he's coming in within the next 2 or 3 laps, and therefore is prepared to really work those tyres hard. If he carried on driving like this all the way through the race, or even for another 15 laps, he wouldn't have much left in the way of tyres, but he can afford to do so, and making very good use of it.
See how he slid there? Is he coming in? Is he coming in? No, he's not. But his tyres are worn, and that will have given Damon Hill the opportunity to close by just a 10th or so. You can't afford to lose traction on the car or have it slide even a few inches without it costing you time. But we're on lap 26, and into the pits comes the Ferrari of Gerhard Berger. He's in 3rd position. Damon Hill will pass the Ferrari in the pits, I think. He was only 10 seconds behind. Out goes Gerhard Berger, and on lap 26, we're with Schumacher again. He's got past the Minardi, down to the Portier.
And Schumacher must surely come in at the end of this lap. Look at that little extra wing on the back of the Minardi there. The only team to do it, of course, McLaren have their mid-wing mounted further forward, but the regulations are the things that provoke these rather odd sort of wings in odd places. They're not allowed to have that wing higher up across the whole width of the car, and there are various boxes all the way around. But Schumacher really pushing, but must come in the pit surely this lap or the next.
And don't worry, we're going to be watching Schumacher in the pits, and we're going to be watching this track in front of us to see whether Damon Hill goes through and passes the German and retakes the lead. This is the Rascasse again. Here he's coming in, if he's coming in. And he is not coming in. Alesi is 2nd, Damon Hill is up to 3rd, Berger is down to 4th, Herbert is 5th, and Katayama is up to 6th.
Right, well, I think what Schumacher is doing here, he's staying out a little bit longer because he really wants to try and pull out a gap over Damon Hill so that when Schumacher comes out of the pits from his pit stop, he can be ahead of Hill. He wants to make up time on the road.
And he could do it because Hill is now 25 seconds behind the German in the Benetton Renault. I wonder if this is another indication of how superb the Benetton technicians and driver in Michael Schumacher, with Pat Simmons, his race engineer, are at getting a winning strategy. Because Schumacher has got the lead and he's got a clear track in front of him. He can get the last mouse power out of his Renault V10 engine and exploit it to increase his lead, and that he is doing. He's 11 seconds ahead of Jean Alesi's Ferrari on lap 27 out of 78. He's 28 seconds ahead of Damon Hill with the corrections on pit stop times. Johnny Herbert in the second Benetton is now fourth. Gerhard Berger, after his pit stop, is down to fifth. Katayama, who's yet to come in, is in sixth position in the Tyrrell. And I look again, and again I can tell from the line of the Benetton as it exits the Gasworks corner, the Anthony Nose corner, forgive me, that he is going through again. He's into his 28th lap now. 11 seconds was the gap before. Waiting for Alesi.
And this may be just one lap too long for Schumacher, assuming that he is going to come in at the end of this lap, because ahead of him he's got the arrows of Inouye, and Inouye was just 2.3 seconds ahead of Schumacher, and that's going to be close enough, and there's a spinner there. There is Inouye.
It's one of the Tyrrells looked to me as though it was parked up against the barrier. No, I apologise, you're quite right, Jonathan, it is Taki Inouye. It's Katayama, my apologies. Katayama, who was in sixth position, presumably on worn tyres, lost it as he came out of Casino Square. Very easy to do, even when your tyres are in good condition, and spun to a standstill alongside the barriers on the Beau Rivage, on the drop down past the Metropole Hotel. That's the camera that you're looking at now. Lap 28.
And adding to the advantage at this stage for Michael Schumacher is the fact that Hill, I think, is being held up by Morbidelli in the arrows, and that could well make the difference with this hard-charging sprint now that Schumacher is undertaking. Let's see, he must come in surely this lap.
No, he does not. But as Schumacher crosses the line, Tony Jardine has got hot news from the pit lane.
David, you must be bitterly disappointed. Tell us what happened.
Well, as you know, obviously I had to take the spare car for the start, and that was set up for Damon, so we had to change some things. But I think there was maybe something not quite 100%, because eventually it broke a gear, and that was it, the gearbox was finished.
Up until then, you've been holding off the Ferraris really well.
Up until then, I was, you know, it took me a while to get used to Damon's car, but I thought, okay, third place, we'll keep it on the circuit. But reliability, unfortunately, wasn't there today, and no more points.
What's your version of the first start? What happened?
Well, Gerhard got alongside me, which I think was fair. But then Jean came up my inside, but it's a decreasing gap into the first corner. So once I'm between two cars, it's exactly the same as Hockenheim last year, when Mika tried to come up. When Mika tried to come up the inside, there just isn't room. So as far as I'm concerned, Jean was just being over-optimistic.
So, in summary then, you're gutted.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we rejoin to see Michael Schumacher in the Benetton, right on the tail of Mark Blundell's McLaren Mercedes, which is in sixth position. So now on lap 30, Schumacher is right up to the sixth place man. He's still only about 11.8 seconds ahead of Alesi, but he's 35 seconds ahead of Damon Hill.
Well, I think this is bad news for Damon Hill, because I think the fact that there's one of the footwork cars, that is Inouye, I believe, in one of the Arrows footwork cars out of the race. It is indeed Inouye. This is, I believe, is bad news for Damon Hill, because I think Schumacher, who waves his fist at Mark Blundell, but really Mark Blundell did not hold Schumacher off a great deal, I think he's going to be only making one stop. It's now lap 29. He'd be making one stop, or could well do, round about lap 35. And with the lap times he's doing, he's looking in very good shape indeed. And it's now my suspicion that, in fact, both Schumacher and Herbert are going to be making just one stop, whereas Hill will have to come in, I'm quite sure, for a second one in about 50 laps. And at the moment, Hill is, or rather Schumacher, is driving at the same sort of pace as Damon Hill.
Now, let's tell you on lap 30 what the stop situation is. Schumacher is on his 30th lap, leading by 11 seconds. He has not stopped. Alesi is second, and he has not stopped. Damon Hill is in third position. He has stopped. Johnny Herbert is fourth, has not stopped. Gerhard Berger is fifth, and he has stopped. Mark Blundell is in sixth position and has been stopped and has been lapped. Lap 30 then, coming up towards half distance, some way from it yet. Lap 36 is half distance, and with Jean Alesi, as you see, just under 24 seconds ahead of Damon Hill, who is actually lapping slower than Alesi, who's just made his fastest lap of the race, 1 minute 25.407. That's only 2/10 of a second slower than Damon Hill's fastest lap. Is flying. He's now under 10 seconds behind Schumacher.
Yes, this is now the race, and now it's looking clear that Schumacher and Alesi and Herbert are just on a one-stop strategy, and that's another 5 laps time, if we're right, for their first and only stop. Then we've got Damon Hill on a 2-stop strategy, as well as Gerhard Berger there, and of course Mark Blundell in 6th. So that's the way it pans out. But at the moment, I would say this is looking very good indeed for particularly Jean Alesi, because he's closing on Schumacher, and Schumacher with a bit more traffic there, with Diniz in the 40 just ahead of him, is going to be hindered a little bit more. This is the battle that we need to be watching and following.
And you can bet your life that Jean Alesi will only need a whiff of success to go for it even harder than he normally does. And there is no doubt about the fact that Schumacher is being held up at the moment at this part of the course where he can't get past Pedro Diniz, who's already been lapped in the 40 twice, who's shown the blue flag by the marshal, and that means that there's someone behind you who wants to get past Pedro Diniz from Brazil, and he's still holding the inside line at Saint-Devote. It looks as though Schumacher's not going to get through there. Now, is Alesi any closer? Indeed he is. Alesi has closed the gap by 7.7 seconds. He's closing up on Michael Schumacher, partly because of the probably because of the traffic situation, but whatever. Alesi has got the bit between his teeth. Schumacher leads on lap 32. Alesi is second. We're with Schumacher. Hill is third, but he's 25 seconds behind Alesi. I wonder if he's got some sort of a problem.
Well, I don't think he has, because he's lapping quickly. He's just on 25.7. He's going well, but I suspect that Schumacher is really pushing as hard as he can now, because what Schumacher will want to do is to try and get into the pit and get out ahead of Damon Hill. At the moment, Schumacher is 7.5 seconds ahead of Alesi. Alesi's 25 ahead of Damon Hill there. So already it's looking as if a good slick pit stop by Benetton, and they are the past masters, could see Michael Schumacher coming out just ahead of Damon Hill.
And it would be nice if we could have a look at the battle between Johnny Herbert and Gerhard Berger, who are 4th and 5th and very close indeed to each other. Yet again, Michael Schumacher goes through. He's reminding me of the mastery of the late and very great Ayrton Senna, who had this amazing ability to go longer, faster on worn tyres in the dry or on slick tyres in the wet before he changed than anybody else, as a result of which he won a lot of races through his consummate skill in that area. And that is exactly what Schumacher is doing now, but Alesi is matching him. Indeed, his last lap was 0.3 of a second faster. There is a Ferrari, and it is this is what I wanted to see. This is the battle between Johnny Herbert, 4th in the Benetton, and Gerhard Berger, 5th in the Ferrari. They're coming up to one of the Minardis, which inevitably will get in the way, and it may mean that Gerhard Berger can really attack Johnny Herbert. But Herbert is once again demonstrating that he has got a lot of skill, which we all knew, but that given the right car, he can finish well up. He was second in Spain, and he is in 4th position now. Schumacher, his team leader, is number 1 on the course, leading Alesi. 3rd is Hill, 4th is Herbert, 5th is Berger, and there they go, chasing the Minardi as they come down to the hairpin at Lowe's.
Yes, that's Martini there ahead of Herbert, and this illustrates one of the problems with making 2 stops as opposed to 1. That's what Gerhard Berger has done, and he's come out of the pits. He's caught Johnny Herbert up relatively quickly, but Herbert, making just 1 stop, is lapping slower, but Berger can't find a way by.
And it'll be very difficult because Johnny Herbert is an extremely experienced driver. This is his 68th Grand Prix. He's had some very hard times and he's not going to let the opportunity to finish in the points again escape him.
Now the smart thing to do for Benetton is to bring Herbert in now, because he's losing time there, running there behind Martini, and ahead of Martini is Morbidelli, ahead of Morbidelli is Bouillon. There's a lot of traffic there, and if they could manage to readjust their tank, their fuel flow, so they could bring Herbert in now, it would be certainly time-saving for them.
And to underline what I was saying about the mastery of Michael Schumacher, you have just seen that he's made Taki Inui, that he's just made the fastest lap of the race, notwithstanding the fact that he's on his 34th lap. Herbert has got past the Minardi. Berger has not. We're with Damon Hill now. Let's see where he is. He's coming down to Lowe's corner, and he's 27 seconds behind Alesi, who is 8 seconds behind Schumacher, who leads the race, and Hill is 14 seconds ahead of Johnny Herbert, who is half a second ahead of Gerhard Berger, who is 44 seconds ahead of 6th place Mark Blundell. So Mark Blundell, on his return to the McLaren team, is in the points as he was in the first race of the year in Brazil. Berger turns out of the Portier into the tunnel on his 35th lap. We come out of here at 160 miles an hour, believe it or not. Hard on the brakes for the chicane, which is 30 miles an hour at its slowest point. Coming towards us is Jean-Christophe Bouillon, who is in the Sauber, his first Grand Prix, 10th position. He's already been lapped once, and now he's been lapped twice.
And one of the problems may well be at the moment that the Benetton team clearly will prioritise on Michael Schumacher. He would need to have the first chance to come in, and just maybe that's why they're not bringing Johnny Herbert in at this stage, because Schumacher must surely come in at the end of this lap or the next if he's going to make the one stop. There wouldn't be any real logic to staying out longer, although he's still got to his advantage a lot of clear space ahead of him and the ability to keep lapping without people being in your way. He was some 26 seconds of clear track before he came to Panis. It's a great opportunity for Schumacher to keep pulling out, punching in quick laps, and he's doing that very well indeed.
Quite astounding. He's on his 35th lap now, and he is 8.3 seconds ahead of Jean Alesi, so he has increased the gap over the French Sicilian in the Ferrari. Schumacher climbs up the Beau Rivage, turns into Casino Square. We look back and we see a clear track, no sign of the Scarlet Ferrari, but Ferrari are 2nd and 5th. They are consolidating their reliability reputation, which they've earned the hard way in 1995.
And at the midway point, there's 8.2 seconds in it. Alesi is 8.2 seconds behind Schumacher. And in the first day's qualifying, Alesi was quicker. So these cars have both got one pit stop to make within the next couple of laps. And the stop that Ferrari made for Berger was very, very good indeed. They've sharpened up their act on pit stops. We know that Benetton's is good. It's going to be vital for both these teams to do whatever they can to keep the stop sharp, because that could make a crucial difference.
The tyre warmers are out at Benetton. We don't know whether it's for Herbert or for Schumacher. We expected Schumacher to be stopping first in Spain, but it turned out to be Johnny Herbert. And incidentally, we should not forget that both Alesi and Gerhard Berger, as Niki Lauda pointed out to us before the race began, are in their spare cars, not set up as well as their race cars. We're riding with Schumacher. Are we going to turn into the pit lane? Indeed we are. Now this is Michael Schumacher stopping, and I'm waiting to see whether Jean Alesi goes through in the lead in the Ferrari. Yes, Alesi leads. Alesi leads, but he hasn't stopped, of course. Alesi leads on lap 37 in the Ferrari out of 78 as Michael Schumacher gently drives out of the pit lane. Remember, there's a speed limit and you get penalised 10 seconds at least if you exceed it, and losing 10 seconds is the least thing in the world he would want to do right now. But on lap 37, with Schumacher having stopped, Alesi leads. Schumacher is ahead of Hill. So Damon is still third, but has stopped once and is going to come in again, we are sure. And it's looking good for Schumacher, but it might be looking extremely good for Jean Alesi as Herbert and Berger, 4th and 5th, start another lap ahead of Mark Blundell, who is still 6th but has been lapped. Martin Brundle, who is now 7th in the Ligier.
And interestingly, Jean Alesi has now set the fastest lap of the race, 24.6. Alesi on a real charge. Alesi trying to do to Schumacher what Schumacher did to Hill, and that's really pull out the stops when he's got a clear bit of track to do it. There's Alesi, there's the man, and his spectacular style is so well suited to this kind of circuit. This is where raw driving talent really comes to the fore, and that doesn't come in any healthier doses as Alesi comes into the pits. 10.2 seconds it was for Schumacher.
Now, Alesi rolling in. You can see the smoke pouring off the right front. The Ferrari mechanics are usually extremely good at pit stops, tyre changes and fuel. I'm waiting to see what happens with Michael Schumacher. It seems to be a long stop. The fuel filler comes out cleanly. Out goes Jean Alesi, being careful not to exceed the speed limit. And rejoins the track as Schumacher goes past. And Schumacher has regained the lead. This is wonderful stuff. As he climbs up the Beau Rivage, Michael Schumacher has taken the lead from Jean Alesi. So all the first three have now stopped, and the race will settle down a bit until probably Damon Hill comes in for a second stop. We don't think that either Schumacher or Alesi will be stopping. Again, that is Alesi, who is now second. And Schumacher is leading again by about the same margin as he was when he came in.
Well, this is really very, very disappointing news for the Williams team and Damon Hill, because Schumacher has not only got out ahead of Alesi, he's got out ahead of Hill, and Hill is now 12 seconds behind Schumacher, and mechanical problems and incidents for Schumacher apart, there is nothing, I believe, Damon Hill can now do to challenge either Schumacher or Alesi.
So the Benetton strategy looks like coming out on top again. Sometimes they stop 3 times when people are expecting them to stop twice. In Spain, they stopped twice when people expected them to stop 3 times. When they started at Monaco, we didn't know whether they would be starting once or twice. They appear to be stopping once, whereas the Williams are stopping twice. But if we are right, the Benetton strategy is the superior one, and we're on lap 39 of the Monaco Grand Prix with the man you are looking at, Michael Schumacher, in the Benetton Renault, leading Jean Alesi's Ferrari now by 10.7 seconds, 3 seconds more than he was when he came in to make his pit stop. Damon Hill is 2 seconds behind Alesi, 13 seconds behind Schumacher. Herbert is 4th, 22 seconds behind Damon Hill. And Berger is 5th with Mark Blundell still in 6th position. So, British drivers, Damon Hill 3rd, Johnny Herbert 4th, Mark Blundell is in 6th position. Martin Brundle is in 7th position.
Herbert is indeed 4th now, but let's not forget that Herbert has yet to come in for his pit stop. He's the only one that hasn't, and when he's done that, that's going to put Herbert back behind Berger, but probably in front of Mark Blundell. But nevertheless, a very, very good drive here from Johnny Herbert.
Indeed, but the sort of drive we've expected from Michael Schumacher, and it's no wonder that already on only race 5 in the 16 or 17 race World Championship Series, we're with Damon Hill, we're hearing stories about teams vying for Michael Schumacher's services in 1996. His contract runs out at the end of the year. That's Gerhard Berger going round the Rascasse. Damon Hill here. That was Alesi, my apologies, and he is just 2 seconds now in front of Damon Hill. Now, this is the interesting this. There is Alesi. Behind him is Morbidelli, who is 16th and been lapped 3 times. Now, there's Damon Hill. Alesi, Morbidelli, Damon Hill, who's being held up out of Casino Square, down to the Mirabeau. Into the pits comes Johnny Herbert from 4th position, and that means to say that Gerhard Berger, who has gone through, is now up into 4th position in the Ferrari. The Benetton mechanics being very, very careful, remembering what happened with Jos Verstappen at Hockenheim last year when we had that enormous fire, which was very quickly put out by Greg Field and the rest of the Benetton people extremely well. Johnny Herbert rejoins. That is Jean Todt, who is the race boss at Ferrari, responsible for the Ferrari Renaissance, and he's making a jolly good job of it too. As we watch Michael Schumacher coming through to complete his 40th lap out of 78. He was 13.2 seconds ahead of Jean Alesi, thanks to a superb lap. And we're waiting for the Frenchman to come through in the Ferrari as I talk to you. He's just done so, and the gap is now 13.6, just 0.3 of a second greater, but it indicates that Schumacher is very much in control.
Well, he is at this stage, but so far the traffic's been kind to Schumacher and been difficult for Alesi. That's contributed to that gap expanding from nearly 9 seconds before they made their pit stops to 13.5 now. And the pit stop from the Benetton team for Schumacher was just a little bit better than that from Alesi, and in fact in the total pit lane Schumacher was in the pit lane for about half a second less than Alesi. But Hill now will know that his chances of salvaging a second place out of this race, certainly assuming that Schumacher and Alesi keep going, Hill's chances must come from trying to get ahead of Alesi now, because Hill has got another pit stop yet to go. Alesi hasn't, and Hill is just 2.2 seconds behind Alesi. Now Hill has got the lighter fuel load at this point. Alesi's car is pretty heavy, and we know from the fact that Alesi set the race fastest lap to date in the closing stages of his first stint when those tyres had done 35 laps. We know that the tyres shouldn't be a problem, and therefore Hill should be in a better state if only he can try and find a way by.
Schumacher coming up to pass Mark Blundell again. He lapped him, of course, but then the pit stop situation changed it. I didn't mention, incidentally, one of the British drivers, Eddie Irvine, who's retired his Jordan Peugeot from the race, having hit something and broken a front wheel rim. Lap 42, 78 lap race. Berger coming up to catch Mark Blundell, who's back in 6th position, on target for a World Championship point to add to the one that he got earlier on in the season. And now Alesi is 14 seconds behind. Race order: Schumacher, Alesi, Hill, Berger, both the Ferraris in the top 6, Herbert 5th, both the Benettons in the top 6, Mark Blundell is 6th, Brundle 7th, Badeur 8th, Frentzen 9th, Martini 10th, Barrichello is 11th, Mika Salo is in 11th position, and in 14th place is Jean-Christophe Bouillon, who has been lapped twice, and Mika Salo is in the 2nd. Tyrrell Katayama having already retired. Salo is in 12th place.
And that's Martin Brundle there. Brundle in 7th place, who's got Alesi behind him. And of course behind Alesi is Damon. And
oh, that's a Ferrari that's in the top. That's Mark Brundle, and one of the Ferraris. It's Alesi, who was 2nd. Now, of course, this is going to rivet things for Michael Schumacher, who's got the luck on his side, and very much so. Martin Brundle and Jean Alesi appear to have made contact in the swimming pool area, and out from 7th place goes Martin Brundle that we are looking at. Out from 2nd place goes Jean Alesi, which means to say, as we look at the Ferrari, here's a replay on Damon Hill's car, and you can see Martin Brundle sliding away backwards. Alesi is already stationary, and we're watching Damon Hill moving up into 2nd place as a result of the retirement of Jean Alesi, who, bitterly disappointed, crestfallen, wondering whether his terrible luck is ever going to change, retires from the Monaco Grand Prix, and he looks to be perfectly all right. Clambering out of the car. Well, I tell a lie, he does not seem to be perfectly all right. Far from it. I thought from the way he was starting to get out of the car that he was perfectly okay, but you saw for yourselves the fact that he has to be lifted away means to say that he's in some sort of physical trouble. Martin Brundle seems to be okay. That's one blessing. Meantime, Michael Schumacher comes into the swimming pool area through the Rascasse again. Now he's 16 seconds ahead of Damon Hill. The situation is as it was at the beginning of the race, but reversed. That is to say, Schumacher leads Hill where Hill led Schumacher, thanks to the changes on the pit stop situation. And 16 seconds is a mighty gap on lap 44 out of 78. Gerhard Berger moves up into 3rd place. Johnny Herbert is back in 4th position. Mark Blundell moves up to 5th position, a potential 2 points. And that seems to me that Luca Badoer in the Minardi is potentially going to score a point for the Italian constructor for the first time this season. This is something that traditionally happens at Monaco as the retirements happen towards the end of the race. All sorts of drivers and cars you don't expect to be in the points end up there.
Well, indeed, and what a catastrophe there for Jean Alesi. Now, we didn't see what happened in any way at all, really, but it's my guess that on the entrance to Tabac, and that's a 120 miles an hour corner that follows that chicane, that Alesi thought that Brundle was letting him through on the inside. Brundle clearly didn't have that, or potentially didn't have that intention, and the two collided as they went into Tabac, and that means Alesi would have thumped into the guardrail there with that right front corner of his car at around about 100 miles an hour, and Brundle, of course, spinning into retirement too. And without seeing it, of course, it's quite impossible to really say any more than that, or indeed attribute any kind of responsibility. But ultimately, I have to say that I would suspect that it was Alesi who was being a little bit too speculative there, and that would have been unlikely for Martin to have confused that kind of situation. He's a highly experienced driver.
Mika Salo in the Tyrrell Yamaha from 12th position exits the pits after having made his first stop. We've got 1 or 2 drivers who've actually stopped 3 times. Gianni Morbidelli has stopped 3 times. Andrea Montemini has stopped 3 times. And of course, both of those drivers were penalised. So it was for a 10-second penalty rather than for an extra tyre and fuel stop. Hans-Harald Frentzen has stopped when we didn't expect him to for the same reason, as has Olivier Panis. But now all the top 6 drivers have made 1 tyre and fuel stop, they being on lap 45. This man, Michael Schumacher, leading Damon Hill by 16 seconds and lapping on his last lap just 1/10 of a second quicker than the Englishman. Gerhard Berger is 44 seconds behind the Benetton. Johnny Herbert is 74 seconds. That's very nearly a full lap behind Michael Schumacher. Blundell in 5th position has been lapped. Badoer in 6th place has been lapped. Heinz-Harald Frentzen is in 7th position, and out of the track turns Bertrand Gachot from 13th position in the Pacific, and they are having a pretty torrid season, mainly because of gearbox problems. But Gachot joins the retirements. At the present moment, we have got 15 drivers left out of the 26 who started. We're on lap 46.
And Schumacher has very slightly backed off his pace now, quite sensibly, knowing that he's free from any challenge from Jean Alesi. He's got Damon Hill now 15.5 seconds behind him, but Damon will surely be coming in for his second pit stop in about 5 laps' time. It's lap 45, lap 50 would be about the right time. We've got more pit stops, therefore, and a second pit stop for Damon Hill and Gerhard Berger. But Johnny Herbert in 4th place currently, like Schumacher, have completed their pit stop routine, so they're going to be driving to the flag, with Mark Blundell having to make a second stop too, and that's again going to be in about another 5 laps.
And it's hardly likely that we're going to see Johnny Herbert climbing through the field to finish second as he did in Spain, because he is now some 31 seconds behind Gerhard Berger. There's Damon Hill coming towards us as we look at an enlargement of Jean Alesi having his crash into the tyre barrier at the swimming pool, and we rejoin Michael Schumacher's Benetton exiting the Rascasse to complete his 46th lap and cross the line up to Saint-Devote. Now basically all Schumacher has got to do with that 15.5 second lead is to keep the Benetton going. He's made his stop, which as far as we know is going to be his only stop. We've seen how supreme he is at driving on worn tyres, from the fact that he put up the fastest lap of the race on lap 34, but Alesi's gone quicker since then, and Schumacher's just basically got to keep going to score his 3rd victory of the race of the year out of 5 races. And there's no question about Schumacher being able to keep going. He is incredibly fit. Back again with Damon Hill.
And Damon Hill there, 15.5 seconds behind Michael Schumacher. But once Hill comes in for that pit stop and comes out again, that's likely to be a gap of 45 seconds. Now, Gerhard Berger is also going to be moving back 30 seconds once he has a second stop, and that's going to put him right in the clutches of Johnny Herbert, providing Johnny can try and, in fact, pick up a bit of a pace. He's still running some 2 seconds slower than Berger at the moment over the last few laps, although that may have been traffic influenced. If Herbert can manage to pick up some pace, we could see a close battle between Berger and Herbert in the closing stages. But for Hill, I'm afraid it's all over, bar second place, which again he'll be, I'm sure, quite pleased with in terms of points, but disappointed in following his pole position performance here, having to accept the fact that on this occasion, Benetton and Schumacher really have got it together with strategy and race performance.
Well, if that happens, and as I say, there's a long way to go yet. We're only on lap 48, there's 30 laps to go. If that happens, the World Championship gap between Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill would increase from 1 point to 5 points, because Schumacher would have scored 10 and Damon Hill would have scored 6. This is Gerhard Berger, 44 seconds behind race leader Michael Schumacher in his Ferrari, having stopped once, but having just made his fastest lap, 1 minute 25.3, which is some 0.8 of a second faster than Michael Schumacher. But since he's 30 seconds behind Damon Hill and 44 seconds behind Schumacher, it is frankly of academic interest. Great pity, to put it mildly, that poor Alesi's gone out.
As again, another scenario for Alesi may have been that he simply got underneath the rear wing too much of Brundle's Ligier and lost the front downforce from that Ferrari, and that just caused him to wash wide, to run wide going through the corner, nudging into the back of Brundle, because Brundle's car certainly didn't seem to be damaged particularly badly, and that scenario might fit. But the strange thing is that that corner and the entry to it is just not an overtaking place. There is no way Alesi could have been sensibly trying to get by Brundle at that point, unless he had felt that and that is Panis there in the second Ligier, unless Brundle had felt, unless Alesi had felt that Brundle was actually leaving the door opening, letting Brundle go through. But I think that would have been unlikely. It wouldn't have been a logical place for Martin to have let Alesi through.
48 laps completed, and as you've just seen, 30 laps to go. Michael Schumacher inch perfect as he goes round the Mirabeau, drops down to Lowe's corner, gets ready to take the Portier, the right-hander, go into the tunnel for the 49th time with this shrinking lead of 14 seconds ahead of Damon Hill. But although Damon Hill is lapping just a few tenths of a second faster, as we've already said, the knowledge that he's got to come in for another tyre stop will mean that Michael Schumacher is going to increase his lead when the Williams stops for its second set of tyres and for more fuel. So Schumacher round the swimming pool, exits past the yacht chandlers on his right, down through the gears, brakes hard, turns in, out of the Rashcas. The end of lap 49 coming up. Out he goes. His car sounding good, looking good, and Schumacher, as I say, more than capable of getting it to the finish in fine fettle.
Now, as we hopefully follow Schumacher up the hill here towards Casino, have a look at the edge off the line. There are the marbles, the little chunks of rubber that line the circuit, off the line that the drivers are using. Beyond that 12 feet or so of track the drivers are on, the little bits of rubber get pushed to one side, and if a car gets on those, it's like literally driving on ice. So it's a particular problem when drivers come up to lap other cars. The cars that are being lapped don't want to move offline onto the marbles, and of course the cars that are lapping too, they certainly don't want to get onto those marbles, because even if you manage to stay on the road and don't lose control, the tyre performance will have been degraded, and the car will be perhaps, there you can see more on the right-hand side behind the Armco in the tunnel. Phenomenal amounts. Now get that on your tyres, and it could take you 2 or 3 laps of lapping 2 or 3 full seconds slower to clean the tyres up and resume your previous level of pace.
And if you want to know what's happened to Jean Alesi, we are still, of course, trying to find out, as Michael Schumacher goes through the swimming pool area again. This is his 50th lap, and he's now 15 seconds ahead of Damon Hill. The race has definitely settled down. Benetton leads, Williams second, Ferrari is in third position, the second Benetton is in fourth position, and this means to say that the Benetton team, with Schumacher leading and Johnny Herbert in fourth position, are on a potential 13 points, whereas the Williams team are on a potential 6 points in the Constructors' Championship. That will close the gap substantially between the Williams team in the Constructors' Championship, which is in second place, only 3 points ahead of Benetton.
And it's second pit stop time now. We're up to lap 50, and that means the ones that we're interested in, Damon Hill, he must surely come in the next lap or two for his second and final stop, and Gerhard Berger.
And with Martin Brundle in the pits, Tony Jardine, what happened?
Martin, I know you must be very upset, but firstly, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm just fine, yeah.
Tell us your version, what happened?
Well, it's my fault. I was pushing very hard to try to make up for the penalty that I got at the beginning of the race. I really don't know why. But I just caught the bumps wrong coming into Tabac. I lost the back of the car, touched the barrier on the way in. And I couldn't help but spin. And unfortunately, Alesi was just an innocent bystander.
Oh dear, but was he okay? Did you see him after the shunt?
He seemed okay. There were lots of marshals around, and they're the guys that specialise in that, so I just left it to them.
Thank you, Martin, for talking to us.
Well, a candid Martin Brundle there. Clearly we got that wrong. We didn't have any information really to go on, but Brundle losing control of his Ligier on the entrance and leaving Alesi with nothing to go into but the wall, and that is going to be really, really devastating for Jean Alesi there. And that's Mark Blundell now in for his second stop.
In fifth position, 1 lap adrift, and it's a typically honest reply that Martin Brundle gave. Also often Grand Prix drivers say it was the other chap's fault. He turned in on me and I couldn't have anywhere to go at all. Martin admitted that he was just pushing so hard that he went off on the bumps. All too easy to do, especially there. We've seen lots of cars in the past end up in the swimming pool area. I remember an arrow's in 2 parts, and that is Alesi walking in. That's good news. We were worried from the way Alesi was lifted out of his car by the marshals that he might have hurt one of his legs, but you can see that he most certainly hasn't as he talks to Jean Todt, his Ferrari team manager boss. But it's a very grim-faced Jean Alesi. Nothing seems to be going right for him this year as far as he's concerned, notwithstanding the fact that he's had actually a couple of second places in Argentina and San Marino. But like all racing drivers, he's just interested in winning. Second places and a 5th place, which is what he had in Brazil, aren't good enough. And he feels, and rightly so, that in his 90th Grand Prix he deserved a victory. Schumacher, Damon Hill's coming in for his second pit stop now. He was 17 seconds behind. This is going to mean that probably about 30 seconds is lost with coming in, stopping and going out again. Just a 7-second halt. That's a very, very good stop, which means to say that he's taken on comparatively little fuel. Here is a replay, and it's one of the Ligier, so it must be Olivier Panis. And that's what the steward said they were going to look on very harshly indeed, anybody cutting across the chicane. So Panis will probably be coming in for a 10-second penalty. Down to the inside goes Michael Schumacher, taking the Minardi, and he's now lapped Johnny Herbert, who is in 4th position. There is Herbert chasing the Minardi for all he's worth. Michael Schumacher is most definitely in a race of his own. Alesi walks away, and Schumacher has now lapped everybody up to Gerhard Berger in 3rd place in the Ferrari on lap 53 out of 48.
People often wonder how a driver of Alesi's talent can have gone on so long without winning a Grand Prix, but when you look at the kind of cruel luck that he's suffered here, it's easy to understand that it isn't through rarely any fault of his own. And Alesi has been in such brimming form this year with his second places, and that to have the qualifying fastest time from the Thursday, then thwarted by having technical problems on the Saturday, and then this after charging and no doubt pushing Schumacher hard, was so desperately hard on Alesi there.
I am frankly trying to identify which of the Minardis it is, because they both wear yellow helmets, they've both got green wings. The only way you can tell is from the colour of the wing mirrors. I think it's Luca Badoer. It is Luca Badoer, who's now been lapped twice, and he's in 7th position. It's an extraordinarily good race as far as the Minardis are concerned. because both of them are only just out of the points. Badeur is in 7th position, 2 laps adrift. His teammate Pierluigi Martini is in 8th place, 2 laps adrift. And the leader on lap 54 continues to be coming towards us, Michael Schumacher. The gap between him and Damon Hill now is 37 seconds. And Gerhard Berger is another 28 seconds behind Damon Hill, with Johnny Herbert having been lapped. Mark Blundell hanging on. He's now got 2 points potentially in the McLaren Mercedes, and that will be vindication, I'm sure, from the McLaren team's point of view, of putting Blundell in the seat, because he's going to have scored points in 2 of the 3 races that he will have driven in if he finishes where he is now or higher in Monaco. Schumacher leads, Hill 2nd, Berger 3rd, Herbert is in 4th place, nearly half a minute behind the Ferrari. Mark Blundell is 5th. Heinz-Harald Frentzen is a deserved 6th now in the Sauber, and that's a story on its own, because yesterday, going up to the Massenet, up the Beau Rivage at about 155 miles an hour, he tipped the barrier, smashed the Sauber to pieces, ripped the left front wheel off it, ripped the left rear wheel off it, destroyed the bodywork, destroyed the tub, that is the chassis, the carbon fibre chassis, as a result of which, from Hinwil near Zurich in Switzerland, the Sauber team had to put a new chassis, a new tub in a van, drive it all the way to Monaco. It didn't arrive until nearly midnight last night, and they built a new car for Heinz-Harald Frentzen, and he's now in 6th position. A lap adrift, but he's on a potential point. And Frentzen has already scored points twice this year in Argentina and San Marino. And although the Sauber team isn't going nearly as well as the Ford management who supply the Works Z-Tech V8 engine would like, being in the points is nothing to be ashamed of. He is 6th, Badeur is 7th, Martini is 8th, Parnis is in 9th position in the Ligier, Rubens Barrichello is in 10th place. Now, retirements are, of course, Ukko Katayama, who has gone out of the race. Coulthard has gone out of the race. Hakkinen has retired in the McLaren. Taki Inui has retired. Sciattarella is out of the race, and so is his teammate Jos Verstappen, both of them the Simtek drivers. Eddie Irvine has retired a long time ago in the Jordan, so has Bertrand Gachot, and the 40 drivers are still battling their way round. But we've got a race of attrition now. Pedro Diniz is last in the running. He's 14th in the 40. He's already been lapped 4 times, and 14 runners out of the 26 who started are still competing on lap 56 out of 78.
And that little battle there going on between Luco Badeur and Martini may just be about to change, because Badeur was ahead of Martini, but after their pit stops, their second pit stops have just taken place, Martini was actually in the pit lane for 4 seconds less than Badeur. Martini was 2.8 seconds behind, so that, by my reckoning, should put Martini ahead of Badeur. And that's going to be of great importance, because whilst it might not seem very important to us to see how well the Minardis are doing with Martini back in 10th place, to that team and to those drivers, that is desperately important for them to try and be quicker than each other, because as in any Grand Prix team, one's biggest adversary as a driver is one's own teammate, because he's the only person that the media, the public, anybody else knows has got the same level of equipment as the driver.
Damon Hill, who we are watching, can only hope that some mechanical fault develops in Michael Schumacher's Benetton Renault, which is very unlikely. They are extremely reliable, because now on lap 57 out of 78, although he's done his 2 tyre and fuel stops, he's 34 seconds behind Schumacher, lapping to within a tenth of a second or so in the same time as Schumacher ahead of him, and therefore not gaining at all. And a 33-second gap is going to need a lot of cutting into, to put it very, very mildly, for Damon Hill to make an impression on Schumacher, let alone catch him, let alone get past him, let alone win the race.
Well, 6 points are going to be of value to Damon Hill, clearly, for his championship aspirations. But I think Damon's going to be a bit disillusioned inside his Williams there. I'm quite sure that when he saw Schumacher pushing him hard in the early stages, he at least thought that Schumacher was on the same two-stop strategy as Damon. And when Damon came in and Schumacher kept going on and on and on, as happened in Spain, I'm sure that Hill could not quite believe just how quickly that Benetton was going, with a fuel load that must have been probably around about 20 kilos, and that's maybe half a second, 7/10 of a second a lap different. So I think there's going to be a bit of head scratching there in the Williams camp. Their pit stop routine, though, as a ray of hope, that has improved, and that stop, that 7-second stop for Hill's second tyre stop, really was very good indeed. And this is the first race that Williams have had a new mechanism of wheel locking pin, and that this year the regulations have stated that you must have, apart from the actual wheel nut, a locking pin to prevent wheels coming off the car. Now Williams had a rather had a system that was less sophisticated but more straightforward, and they've now changed that system to a different interpretation that was being used and is still being used by McLaren, by Ferrari and by Benetton. And the fact that they were using an older, simpler system was penalising them by perhaps half a second per pit stop.
The fact that Ferrari was leading the World Championship in the Constructors category when this race began has proved to be a bit of a false dawn. Benetton are again the car of the year thus far, and if Johnny Herbert, who is fourth, and Michael Schumacher, who is leading, stay where they are, in comparison Gerhard Berger, the only Ferrari runner, it will mean that the Benetton team will leapfrog to the leadership of the Constructors' Championship, past Williams and past Ferrari. And I think they're going to need a lot of catching if they do that, because they've now got something that they haven't had before: two strong drivers. No one needs telling how good Michael Schumacher is, but with the exception of Martin Brundle, none of the Benetton number 2 drivers have been able to match Michael Schumacher for various reasons. JJ Leto had a physical problem to cope with last year. Riccardo Patrese was at the end of his career. But now Johnny Herbert is getting better and better. Not good enough in comparison with Michael Schumacher, but Johnny is still working on the perfection of the setup of his Benetton. But he's in the points. He's in the points again in 4th position. And remember, he finished 2nd in Spain. Good news for Benetton.
Now one has to wonder why, if Benetton can correctly get the right fuel stop strategy in Spain for the last Grand Prix, which was stopping twice instead of 3 times, and here Benetton again have correctly got the right fuel stop strategy of stopping just once, why didn't Williams do that? And I think one of the facts here is that Williams, throughout the qualifying sessions, were chasing just that, and that's qualifying. And that is a slightly different situation when the whole purpose is to get the single fastest lap. It was a very reasonable thing to pursue, because after all, being at the front of the grid is of such paramount importance, and being at the head was certainly helped Damon for the first 25 or so laps of this race. But concentrating on qualifying form, I think it's probably hindered them in terms of working out just what the best configuration would be of fuel load for the race itself. And I believe that in the morning warm-up today, that was the first time when the Williams team had tried to run the car with more fuel in it than perhaps the basic 20 litres or 30 litres. And having tried quite a lot of fuel in the car, in fact enough fuel to make just one stop, so that was the theory that they had prior to the warm-up. The drivers were not particularly happy with the car. Neither Coulthard nor Hill went particularly well. They had traffic problems, but they were still running round about 10th to 15th in the morning session. I think they lost confidence in that as a strategy, and I think that prompted them to revert to a 2-stop strategy. And it might just be that had they spent a little bit more time prior to the warm-up today evaluating the different options, they might have made a better judgment.
So we are now on lap 60 out of 78. Here are the retirements. I know a lot of you are always interested in that, in the order of the retirements. Mika Häkkinen was the first one to go in the McLaren, then it was Roberto Moreno in the 40. David Coulthard had his retirement after having had his problem at the first stop. Then Eddie Irvine went out, followed by Montemini in the Pacific. Katayama in the Tyrrell, Inui in the Arrows, Martin Brundle and Lacey together with their coming together in the Ligier and the Ferrari in the swimming pool area. Bertrand Gachot retired, the second Pacific, whose awful season continues. A much better car than last year, but their season isn't going very much better. Neither of the Simtek started the second time, incidentally. Those were the two missing drivers, and there are still 14 drivers left. Deniz is last in the 40, 14th, 5 laps adrift. Schumacher still leads, and he's 36 seconds ahead of Damon Hill.
And as we look at Mark Blundell in the sole surviving McLaren, we really ought to consider the issue, of course, of Nigel Mansell and the fact that he's not here for this Grand Prix. I'm afraid that this year has perhaps been a rather sad last chapter in the career of Nigel Mansell, who's been so outstanding through much of his career. His 2 race performances this year were disappointing, both in Imola and in Spain. Now, whilst Nigel, as we know, blamed the car and said it was undrivable, the fact remains that Mika Häkkinen was doing a much better job in the car. And having said that, McLaren really did do all they possibly could to try and make the car work for Nigel. They actually made a 2.5 centimetre wider chassis, which is an unprecedented thing to do, after Mansell found out that in the pre-season testing that he could not fit the car properly and that he could not therefore get the best out of it. Well, despite having done that for Mansell, he still couldn't get the best out of it in race conditions. And whilst the McLaren certainly is no Benetton, it's no Williams, and not even a Ferrari, it's better than many of the cars on the grid, and probably that one there, the Sauber, which is a great shame, really. And I think what we're seeing is that maybe Nigel just hung on a bit too long, and knowing when to retire is a very difficult thing to do, and inevitably drivers' performance does fade away. One has to be very, very fit here, as we heard from Martin Brundle earlier. Formula One cars are not getting any easier to drive, and whilst Nigel last year in Williams showed quite a number of times that he really was very quick indeed. He was on pole position at Adelaide, we shouldn't forget, 7/10 of a second quicker than Damon Hill. Despite the fact he won the race there, he really didn't have quite the consistent race pace of the front runners these days. And I'm just very sorry that Nigel didn't actually retire in Australia and came on for another year this year, and it does just perhaps indicate that money alone is not sufficient to really motivate somebody, and when the going gets tough, and having a teammate like Häkkinen really is tough, because Häkkinen, I believe, is as quick as Schumacher, both very, very talented drivers. And I somehow doubt that we'll see Mansell back in a Formula One car. I think the time is certainly overdue for retirement, and it has been a tremendous career for Mansell. His speed, his pace, his gusty, his courageous driving really has been quite outstanding, but I think this year was perhaps 1 year too many.
So here comes Schumacher, lap 63. He's driving well within himself now, 40 seconds ahead of Damon Hill. In fact, his last lap was 2.5 seconds faster than Damon in the Williams Renault. So Michael Schumacher is extending his lead lap by lap, just looking for another 10 points in the World Championship from a third win. He won in Brazil, he won in Spain, and he's on target for a third victory here. And if he gets it, 10 points will lift him to 34 World Championship points. Damon Hill would be on 29, a 5-point gap difference. Now, 5 points isn't very much, but when you bear in mind that it's as a result, or would be as a result, of 3 wins from Schumacher to 2 wins from Damon Hill, it's discouraging for the Englishman, who goes now out of the portiere into the tunnel for the 63rd time in his 78-lap race. 40 seconds now behind Michael Schumacher. Gerhard Berger is holding station, 27 seconds behind Damon Hill. Johnny Herbert has been lapped in 4th position, and you're looking at Damon Hill now coming up to lap Olivier Panis, who is in 8th position in the Ligier Mugen. That's where Panis' teammate Martin Brundle and Lacey had their coming together, and Panis is about to be lapped for the 3rd time by Damon Hill, demonstrating a big gap between the Ligier Mugen Honda and the Williams Renault. But hats off to Ligier under the guidance of Tom Walkinshaw and Tony Dow, who are very much in charge of the Ligier team. It's getting better and better every race, and hopefully with Martin Brundle in the second seat with Parnis, is going to get better still and improve during the season. As you watch Gerhard Berger in the Ferrari, third, coming up to lap Mark Blundell in the McLaren Mercedes, who is in fifth place. So it looks to me as though everyone is driving for the positions that they're in. Schumacher to win, Hill to finish second, Berger to finish third, Herbert to finish fourth, Blundell to finish fifth, and Heinz-Harald Frentzen to finish sixth.
And that's one of the Jordan cars. It's obviously Barrichello who's retired. Some kind of problem for that we may hear soon. But Mark Blundell here, he needs to know, as I'm sure he does, that Berger is behind him, and he's done just the right thing there, I think, yes he has indeed, of letting Berger go by. And one of the skills that a driver has to develop is knowing how to let the front runners lap you without losing time yourself.
Well, bitter disappointment on the face of Rubens Barrichello. Bitter disappointment for the Jordan team, because they frankly have had an awful reliability record this year. Barrichello's only had one finish. Eddie Irvine's only had two finishes in the previous four races. Neither of them have finished here. They're looking for points, and at the beginning of the season were hopeful of being up with the McLarens, the Williams, the Ferraris and the Benetton by virtue of their new association with Peugeot, who moved from McLaren at the end of the year. But that has not been the case, and for Rubens Barrichello the season has been especially poor, because having been the top man, and very much so, in the Jordan team in the past, he has been consistently outdriven in qualifying and in the races by the comparatively new chap to Formula One, Eddie Irvine, who only made his debut in Japan the year before last and had his first full season, albeit with one or two monumental interruptions last year. But Irvine has shown the way to Barrichello in the Jordan team this year, and that is very demoralising for Barrichello, bearing in mind that he's Brazil's top driver now. We're on lap 66. It's a 78-lap race. Michael Schumacher is mentally, physically ticking away the laps, listening to his team, talking to them a bit on the radio, just ticking that all is well between him and Damon Hill. And from Schumacher's point of view, there he is, looking left, looking right. Things are extremely good. 41 seconds ahead of two-stop Damon Hill, who's had them both, and 1 minute and 11 seconds, and Damon Hill gesticulating at the car in front. Who is it? Don't know, but whoever it was is out of the way now, and Damon forges on, having obviously, from his body language, lost time there. And he's enough of a... Well, I think it was Parnis, actually. That's the car that's behind him. Yes, it was Olivier Parnis who was, to Damon Hill's irritation, holding him up. Now, Damon on the previous lap was a full second slower than Michael Schumacher, who is rubbing salt into the wound, which is ironic, really, because yesterday in qualifying, Damon Hill and Schumacher and Alesi and Berger had a colossal battle for pole position. Some of you may have seen it, but Damon Hill, having taken pole position quite commandingly, went out again, and as if to underline the superiority of his Williams Renault over the Benetton Renault at that time, went even quicker. He didn't need to go quicker, he'd already got pole position, but he went quicker again, as if to say, I've got something in reserve, don't think you're going to be able to put anything over on me in the race. Well, that proved not to be the case. Lap 67, Schumacher driving away from Damon Hill. Berger still third, Williams is second, Benetton leads, Ferrari third, Benetton is in fourth position, racking up those Constructors' Championship points. Mark Blundell will be almost literally, I'm sure, praying in the driving cockpit that he can reel off those remaining 13 laps, because he hasn't got to go the full race distance. He's already been lapped to give himself 2 World Championship points. Mark Blundell, like any racing driver, has got enormous faith in himself. If he didn't think he could win and blow everybody else away, he wouldn't be where he is. And Mark Blundell has driven for the Peugeot team and won at Le Mans Sports Car Racing. He's driven for Brabham in their bad days. He's driven for the Tyrrell team. Now he's driving for McLaren. He's been race tester for Williams. He's been race tester for McLaren, and he deserves his seat. There is the Benetton dropping down past the Metropole Hotel into the right-hander, down to Lowe's, and Michael Schumacher is on his 68th lap now. In 6th position it's still Frentzen, Badar is 7th, Parnis is 8th, Martini is 9th, Bouillon in his first Grand Prix for Sauber or anybody else is 10th, Picassalo is 11th, and the remaining 3 runners are Morbidelli, Diniz, and Morbidelli and Diniz because Barrichello is out.
Well, Mika Salo was 11th, but I think he'll be dropping down the order fairly quickly because we've just caught a glimpse of Salo in the Tyrrell coming into the pit lane there. Of course, the only one running after Katayama spun off, and that looks like retirement for some point of view. There he is, Mika Salo, the Finn, really done very well indeed this year. He's out-qualified his teammate Katayama at every Grand Prix bar this one, and that was understandable because here was Salo's first time. And that is Panis out in the Ligier. That's the second Ligier out there now, having hit the wall. You can see the left front wheel having been pushed back there, and that is coming out of Casino. That would have been a fast accident. That's 120 miles an hour in the middle of that corner, and he may have lost perhaps 20 miles an hour. He probably hit the wall, and in fact those black objects that he hit were plastic containers half filled with water as one of the crushable structures that they have around the circuit here at Monaco. Now we should get a glimpse of it. It's just round this left-hand corner. We should see some yellow flags any minute. And there is Panis's car on the left as we now go down to the Mirabeau, the next corner there.
I said when this race began I'd be surprised if more than 12 cars finished it. It looks as though it's going to be a prophecy that's come true. But if you're wondering why the Monaco Grand Prix, having just joined it, is running half an hour after you expected it to have been finished, as you look at Olivier Panis, the answer is that when the race originally started, there was a terrific coming together, as so very often happens at Saint-Devote, the first corner, between David Coulthard and the 2 Ferraris of Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger, as a result of which their 3 cars were wiped out. The 2 Ferrari drivers had to run back and get into their spare cars, and they were lucky they both had one by virtue of the fact that Ferrari had bought 4 cars to Monaco. David Coulthard had to get into Damon Hill's car, which had been set up for Hill. That's Parnis's Ligier, and David Coulthard subsequently retired, and of course the race had to be reformed, the cars had to be removed. That's why it's running late. We're on lap 69 out of 78 with Schumacher driving round for his 3rd victory of the year, and he's still 40 seconds ahead of Damon Hill.
Now I must admit, last year I was a great fan of Olivier Panis. It was his first year in Formula 1. He's a Formula 3000 champion. And this year, though, he really hasn't performed as well at all. He should have been going better. He should have been leading the Ligier team. The second Ligier drive is being alternately taken with Aguri Suzuki and Martin Brundle. And whilst Panis expectedly was quicker than Suzuki, Brundle has really turned that around. And in the 2 races that Brundle has done, he's out-qualified Panis on both accounts. And here was somewhere almost Panis's home circuit where one would have expected better of the Frenchman. But of course in the race itself, Martin made that very rare error, and causing Alesi, Berger, their teammate, to retire from what was one of the most promising races for Alesi and perhaps his best chance to win for a long time. But it looks like Panis is going to have to work a bit harder because his stock value has undoubtedly gone down this year, and for every driver, how they compare again to their teammate is just so fundamentally important. And when it comes to end of season or even mid-season negotiating times, this will be borne in mind heavily, and people will not be so keen on Panis now.
8 laps to go, including the one that they are on. Well, they're just finishing it because Michael Schumacher is coming through shortly to complete his 70th lap. There's Berger climbing up the hill towards Casino Square, and Schumacher has just gone through, having lapped everybody up to Berger, and he may even lap Gerhard Berger before this race is finished. 8 laps to go. He's going to close up on the Ferrari, no, without a shadow of doubt, but whether he will bother to try to get past Gerhard Berger remains to be seen. I'm quite sure that Gerhard being the experienced and gentlemanly driver that he is, would let Schumacher through. There wouldn't be a great battle with anybody trying to prove anything. Gerhard would know that the Benetton was some 2 miles ahead of it, and he might just as well let it go through. There may be a bit of pride, but Berger wouldn't lose any points by letting Schumacher through. There's, as we move up, Olivier Panis ruefully regarding the remains of his Ligier. Left front wheel, suspension completely shattered. That is Schumacher. This is his 71st lap. Still 40 seconds ahead of Damon Hill, who is settling for second, as Berger is settling for third, as Herbert is settling for fourth, as Blundell is very thankfully, joyfully settling for fifth and 2 points, as Frentzen is settling for sixth and 1 point, Badeur seventh, Martini eighth. It looks as though both the Minardis are going to finish. Bouillon is in ninth position, excellent in his first Grand Prix at as demanding a place as Monaco, where he finished seventh in a Formula 3 race in the past. Gianni Morbidelli is in 10th position. Pedro Diniz is in 11th place, and those are the only 11 runners left out. Is this a replay? It is, and there is the Minardi losing it as Damon Hill goes through.
Well, I think that Minardi, and I think that's Luco Badeur, has got some kind of a problem, because the way that it fishtailed around was rather suggestive of some kind of suspension failure or something certainly coming loose on the car, because it wasn't a characteristic slide. A normal slide is relatively easy, even at that point, for drivers of this calibre to actually control. But now Schumacher and Hill are now reeling off the laps with just 7 laps to go. And this is the time when, of course, fingers are crossed everywhere. They're crossing the pit lane in the cars. Damon Hill having that problem with the hydraulics of his car on the very last lap of the Spanish Grand Prix 2 weeks ago, dropping him back from second to fourth. I'm sure that thought hasn't escaped him. And this year, one has to say that Benetton's reliability really has been exemplary. Now that they've got the Renault engine sorted out, they seem to have found the pace, certainly when it matters in the racing. And it looks like Williams have got a bit more work to do yet to both get the cars on the pace in race configuration and also to get the reliability with, of course, Coulthard's gearbox problem. But for Schumacher, he just now needs to be neat and precise. He doesn't need to push particularly hard. And when a driver backs off 2 or 3 seconds a lap, and that's what Schumacher's doing now, he's lapping, well, he was lapping in the 28s, he's just now lapped in the 26s, 26.6 for Schumacher. The fastest lap so far is in the 24, so he's a couple of seconds off what he might otherwise do. He doesn't need to push too hard, but he doesn't need to back off too much either, because backing off too much can lose the concentration, lose the driver's rhythm. And once a driver backs off by just 1 second a lap, or 2 seconds a lap at the most, that's enough for him to be feeling as if he's driving hugely inside his limits. He will not feel that he's pushing hard at all, running just 2 seconds a lap slower. And yet, 2 seconds a lap slower is probably an average speed of just about 2 miles an hour less.
Luca Badeur has retired. Whatever the problem was that gave him that heart-stopping moment exiting Casino Square, where the really good drivers literally do kiss the barrier with their left rear tyre, and they're doing about well over 100 miles an hour as they exit the Casino Square. So Badeur is right out. There's just 11 drivers left now. We're watching the lead man, and if Johnny Herbert finishes here in 4th position, and he's only got 6 laps left to go, it will mean that he will have been in the points in 3 of the 5 races that he's driven in for Benetton this year, having driven for Ligier last year and for Lotus last year and also for Benetton last year, and in the San Marino Grand Prix was only just off the points in 7th position. So Johnny Herbert is well and truly arriving this year, and deservedly so. That's Damon Hill, 43 seconds behind now. And what you have to do at this stage of the race, whoever you are and wherever you are, is to make sure that you don't lose your concentration, don't lose your rhythm. Even if you've decided that you're going to settle for the position that you are in, you must not slacken off your speed so much that you go off the course and hit a barrier and out of the race.
Now, in some ways, this race is very reminiscent of that a year ago when Schumacher won and Berger was third, and that's what we've got here now. But one name that is different is Frentzen back there in 6th place, and I think he's done a particularly good job here this weekend. Frentzen did not actually race here last year when his teammate Carl Wendlinger had that dreadful accident which left him comatose for 19 days. And the Sauber team withdrew Frentzen. He's had a torrid time in qualifying, not helped by the fact that his new teammate Bouillon, and I think Sauber correctly have now replaced Wendlinger, who was clearly off the pace. He was some 2 or 3 seconds slower than Frentzen, not having regained the form that he had originally. Bouillon, this French Formula 3000 driver, has taken over. He hasn't been particularly quick here, and he's had incidents, but we shouldn't judge him too early. He'll need quite a few races to get into the swing of things, and I think he will go very well, because in testing with Williams he was not far off the pace of Damon Hill and Coulthard. So good promise to come from Bouillon, but Frentzen has had a lot of problems. We saw it at the start of this race when he had to take over the spare car, and I believe that Frentzen is up there with Schumacher, with Hakkinen, and with Damon Hill at his best in terms of pace. And I think we could well see Hans-Harald Frentzen changing teams, and he's been tipped to be joining McLaren from 1996.
There is Michael Schumacher, lap 75, 4 laps to go, including the one that he's on, between him and his 3rd victory of the year. A commanding and dominating performance indeed. He's 43 seconds ahead of Damon Hill now, and to give you an indication of how the drivers are just driving for their places, Hill is 43 seconds behind Schumacher, Berger is 35 seconds behind Hill, Herbert is 45 seconds behind Berger, and of course has been lapped. Blundell is 50 seconds behind Herbert, and Heinz-Harald Frentzen is 16 seconds behind Blundell. So there's nothing even remotely like a race to decide a position in the top 6 in the Monaco Grand Prix at the moment. Reliability for the car and consistency for the driver are the names of the game now.
And as when we have another close-up view of the front of Schumacher's car, look at the amount of muck and dirt above his visor and on the frontal aspects of the car. It's like the front of the leading edge of the front wings. And that is the kind of level of dirt that would have been over that visor had he not had the rip-off to pull off. He'll still have part of it on there. And at this sort of time, it's easy to forget the fact that we have a good view of what's going on, but Schumacher's view will probably not be too good inside the car. The chances are this set of tyres are vibrating slightly from having picked up a little bit of debris around the place. The environment inside the car is going to be hot, sticky, vibrating, with poor vision, and it's easy to forget that when we look at it now, with him apparently serenely sailing on to this surely victory.
Only 3 drivers have won the Monaco Grand Prix in the last 11 years. Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna and Michael Schumacher, who won last year, and who looks as though he's going to make it 2 in a row, because he's on lap 76 now as he goes round the chicane on the comparatively new part of the circuit, compared with the old days when the Mercedes-Benz, the Auto Unions, the Maseratis and the Alfa Romeos used to race here. And Michael Schumacher's just got to go lap 77, lap 78 after this one, and it's going to be 2 wins in a row for Monaco, for him. He lives in Monaco. That doesn't mean to say that you know the circuit any better, but it's nice always to win at home, and Schumacher certainly regards Monaco as his second home. He doesn't live very much in Kerpen in Germany these days, near to Cologne, because he is so popular in Germany that he literally, like Boris Becker, cannot go anywhere without being mobbed by enormous crowds. He gets no peace, and as a result of that has moved out of his home country here to Monaco, so he's not going to have very far to go home. He's on his 77th lap now, just this and the next 2 miles to give him another 10 points and a second successive victory at Monaco.
Yes, so 1.5 laps to go for Schumacher, and this has been another underlining of Benetton's newfound control over the front of Formula One when it comes to racing. The Benetton team strategy has been perfect, stopping once. Their pace has been good, running right alongside Damon Hill with a heavier fuel load, and with both Herbert and Schumacher running strongly at the finish, the reliability is right there too. So Benetton really have got their act together superbly. For Williams, Hill drove superbly in qualifying, putting it on pole position by a margin that I don't think even a Lacey or Schumacher at their absolute best could have challenged. So great performance from Williams there, but I think the lack of attention to race setup, perhaps to race fuel load configurations, has hampered them. and that has meant that it's been a second place, certainly by quite some margin too. 40 seconds is a long way in motor racing. Second place there for Damon Hill. David Coulthard, having driven superbly on his first time here at Monaco, qualifying third, was really quite exceptional, and retiring through no fault of his own from the race after he had that gearbox problem. But Ferrari once again have proven that they could well be the challengers on pace to Schumacher, with Alesi having set a searing pace throughout the weekend, both in qualifying and in the race. But as has happened throughout this weekend, it being Berger who's picked up the actual results in qualifying with his third, and with his fourth in qualifying, and in the race here with third. And also I think credit to McLaren and Mark Blundell, who's made mistakes in practice, he made mistakes in qualifying, but when it came to the bit that mattered, the race, he's driven superbly to bring the McLaren home in 5th place.
A wonderful weekend for the Schumacher family here at Monaco. Ralf Schumacher, Michael's younger brother, had a terrific scrap for victory in the Formula 3 race, the prestigious Formula 3 race yesterday, and missed it by just a few tenths of a second. And brother Michael, the senior member of the family, is almost home for his second successive Monaco Grand Prix victory, which is going to extend his World Championship lead over second place Damon Hill to 5 points. Gerhard Berger, who looks as though he's going to finish third, he's reliable now, is going to move up to third position in the Drivers' Championship ahead of Jean Alesi. Johnny Herbert in the second Benetton is going to move up to 5th position ahead of David Coulthard, who of course retired long ago. But Schumacher exits, and that's Bouillon. Schumacher exits the last corner and takes the checkered flag, and victory at Monaco. Another 10 points, and that is really underlining not only his superiority but his team's superiority. Benetton with Renault Power have beaten Williams with Renault Power, and in the process have enabled the French engine manufacturer Renault to win their first Monaco Grand Prix. For good measure, they're bringing the second car home as well, because there is Damon Hill finishing in second place. Victory for Schumacher, Benetton and Renault. Second place for Hill, Williams and Renault. Third position, and he's a long way back, 38 seconds back. Here he is, Gerhard Berger, turning out of the Tabac into the swimming pool, or in the swimming pool surround, down to the Rascasse to come home in third position on the podium again, as he has been so many times this year. It's his 4th third position. Brazil, San Marino, Spain, and now here at Monaco, and a 6th position in Argentina. So he will have been in the points for every Grand Prix this year. And Berger says that Ferrari are going to be on the winning pace for Canada, which is the next Grand Prix on June the 11th. That'll be interesting to see. But they're not on the winning pace here. Bad luck indeed for poor Jean Alesi. Another victory for Schumacher. Another second place for Damon Hill. And here's Michael. It's supremely happy, Michael, shaking the fist of victory, waving his hand to the crowd. It's been a great day for him.
It has indeed, and whilst Monaco used to be the domain for Ayrton Senna to show his talent, Senna winning this race 6 times in 7 years prior to last year, it now seems that Michael Schumacher has taken over, and quite fittingly so too, I think, because with his victory last year, with his superb pole position last year, and having got it all together here in the race, having driven with great maturity, having worked with the team, and this is terribly important too, to work with the team, to make the right decisions, to influence the team in the right way, to work with the engineers, working on your setup, working on your fuel stop routine. It takes a very rounded level of skill, and all of these things are important, and the results of all of that, getting it right, can be seen there.
As I forecast, Benetton have leapfrogged Williams and Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship. It's a Benetton driver who has increased his lead in the Drivers' Championship, and it's Michael Schumacher together with Johnny Herbert who have enabled the Benetton team to move from third to first in the Constructors' Championship. They're now 4 points ahead of Williams, who are 1 point ahead of Ferrari. 5 points between first and third. It's pretty close. And here is the traditional scene as the winner of the Monaco Grand Prix comes up to the gendarmes. It's not traditional for him to be greeted by Flavio Briatore, except last year, of course. and the Italian boss of the Benetton team is understandably euphoric at the success of his young German team leader. He's only 24, Michael Schumacher, and now he will be out of the car into the royal box to receive the winning trophy.
And Schumacher there, quite jubilant, and I'm sure that in the early stages of the race, as he was following Damon Hill there, he was wondering what was going to be going on with their fuel strategies. And when he saw Hill peel off into the pits at lap 24 for that first stop, he must have known that he was carrying on for another 7 laps, and he knew then, as he knew in Spain, that the race was his.
A very weary and, to me, dejected-looking Damon Hill climbs out of the Williams. I mean, second place at Monaco is a stupendous achievement, but as I said before, if you're a racing driver, and particularly a Formula One racing driver, nothing less than victory, 10 points, a win will do. Gerhard Berger in the background, he's probably the greatest realist in Formula One there is. He went to the Ferrari team from McLaren after he had succeeded there in a situation, that's Johnny Herbert, in a situation where the Ferrari team was well down, very well down, and he stuck with them and patiently helped them develop the car, and it's now very nearly in a winning situation. Not up to Benetton, not up to Williams, but not far behind, and he's forecasting victory in the not so distant future. Schumacher. Well, I wonder if this is the sign of the superiority which is going to mean a second World Championship. There's His Serene Highness Prince Rainier. The trophy to Michael Schumacher. The cheers from the crowd. And the German national anthem.
Die Königin ist auch mal wieder gerettet. God save the Queen, und ein überglücklicher Michael Schumacher.
Er hat allen Grund zur Freude. Hinten Prinz Albert. Und rechts Caroline verdeckt hinter Flavio Briatore. Und der große Herr in der Mitte, das war Michel Boiry, der Chef des Automobilclubs von Monte Carlo, der Präsident.
Bei den heute hier herrschenden Boxen-Gassen-Verhältnissen, die wir schon mehrmals angesprochen haben, und bei den Sicherheitsbestimmungen hier gab es keine Chance für uns, Michael Schumacher vor der Siegerehrung zum Interview zu bekommen. Aber hinterher steht er uns natürlich zur Verfügung, und dieses Interview sehen Sie entweder in den Nachrichten um 18:45 Uhr oder aber, wenn wir heute Nacht um 1 Uhr noch einmal das Rennen in kompletter Länge wiederholen. Dann natürlich nicht nur mit Schumachers Stimme zum Rennen, sondern auch mit Stimmen der anderen Beteiligten. Der 53. große Preis von Monte Carlo. Zum zweiten Mal Sieg für Michael Schumacher vor Hill, vor Gerhard Berger. Und das verspricht eine sehr interessante Ausgangsposition für die nächsten Rennen, besonders in Kanada zu werden. Denn sowohl bei den Fahrern wie auch bei den Teams hängt man sehr eng beieinander.
Michael Schumacher hat 34 Punkte, dann Hill 29, Berger 17, Alesi 14, Johnny Herbert 12.